looking from the last 2 weeks, what are some of the questions that you like to take up? And so if you could take a moment, and I don't know, Evis, if they're able to type on this, and we can see it as they type. What's that?
They are, but if you show it like this, it will not show being updated. You have to show it like without the full screen.
So just stop sharing.
Yeah, or you can share without using the full screen.
Oh, okay.
Can they see it to type in?
Yeah, they can see it. And I will put the link to the PowerPoint again. By mistake, I put something else.
They just need to click on it in the chat, right?
I'll tell you, Evis, if you could, okay, yeah, that's okay. If you could share it, that's good. Because I'm not getting it.
When you show it, you just instead of using the slideshow here on the right, you just show it like without doing that, and that's how you can see it live.
Oh, I see. Okay. Oh, I got you. Okay. All right. So far it says no particular questions. That's good. Can't think of anything. It all makes sense so far. Robbie asked a good question. How should one go about understanding where ABCD is happening in our community? Or how does one start something ABCD?
I don't know what happened.
Okay. So John talks about affiliated partners or partnerships regionally and statewide. Can we partner with others? Yeah. Okay.
This first link is wanting me to sign up for something. It's not really opening anything. That's not the right spot, I take it. Is Miro?
Oh,
Yeah, that's for another activity.
Yeah,
Okay.
Don't do that yet.
Okay, thanks. I was like getting a little lost.
Yeah, that's this afternoon's work.
Yeah, I can post again the PowerPoint.
All right. So yeah, so just to touch on, we're going to go in deeper the next, of course, this Saturday and next Saturday. And hopefully Robbie mentions, how do we go about recognizing ABCD or understanding where ABCD is happening in our community. That's part of your asset mapping, in particular one-on-one conversations where you connect those dots. And that takes time. Of course, first of all, you got to understand what you're looking at or looking for in the concept of ABCD. And then at that point, you'll start seeing it. We're going to be working on the invisible becoming visible today. That's one of the aspects. And that will go to some of that, I think, Robbie, of how do we see ABCD? So taking the invisible and making it visible. Of course, yeah, it can feel overwhelming as far as it is really a way of life, a way of looking at things, a perspective that has it's really countercultural in many ways. And we'll talk more about that today as well. We are going to be talking about power structures. Matt talks on a little bit power structures and often receive pushback from institutions. Yeah, we're going to wrestle with that as well on what we can do in those areas. And we'll look at today. We'll delve into more political and economic structures, and next Saturday we'll continue those discussions and also bring in the judicial, law enforcement, some of those aspects as well. So good. Well, this is good. Let me go ahead and share my screen if I can find it. I don't know if this is it. Can you all see that? Okay. All right. So anyhow, just once again, welcome back. We're going to look at these things that you're looking, that you're wanting to include. Of course, discussion of equity, diversity, inclusion. That's really an ABCD principle and guidelines that we want to include. I think I used the example of a jigsaw puzzle and the Chinese proverb that said that when God created the world, every individual got a piece of the puzzle. The challenge is for us to come together to put those puzzle pieces together to develop utopia, to develop heaven on earth, to really come together. And how frustrating it is, at least for me, whenever you get it, when I used to do jigsaw puzzles, that you work so hard and you're putting all the pieces together. And then as you get closer and closer, you have missing pieces, right? And those are the individuals that we haven't found that need to be included. And so think of ABCD in that concept, that visual, that we need to include everyone. Everyone brings something to the table. All right. So we'll go and look at those and try to address them as we go along. So once again, just to review on the guiding principles, and if I can maybe bring this up slide. No. Let's see. Okay. Can everybody see that? I'm okay. So our guiding principles, just to review real quick. And once again, this is important as practitioners of ABCD, and I know I do this quite on a regular basis of going back and reviewing, because sometimes we can get complacent. Of course, other things enter into our thought processes. The world, as I mentioned, ABCD in a lot of ways makes a lot of sense when you do it, but it's very countercultural in some aspects. Instead of looking at the world as deficit-based, we look at it as asset-based. And of course, everybody wants to focus on the deficit. It's difficult sometimes to gain our perspective and regain it. So we come to this conversation as people. That means that we carry with us all kinds of skills, gifts, histories, stories, various components of our lives that experiences that we can bring to bear in looking at any given issue or any given problem. And so these types of things are very critical and important, in particularly in ABCD. We all have different voices and ways of understanding things, which, first of all, as an ABCD practitioner, there's no wrong or right way. You know, the idea is we all come with different understandings. We may not share it, but we try to understand. And so we need to be authentic in ourselves. And that means that, you know, conversations, even progress on different issues or projects aren't just linear. And that's something that takes patience, where you think that, you know, everything needs to be moved forward. Sometimes it's circular, sometimes we step back and in order to move forward. So it's not as clean as what we would always want it to be or in our perspective. We trust that we have the skills to accomplish greater things together. So with the understanding that by coming together with another person, there's a synergism there, and you together collectively, you can do more than what you could by yourself. We are independent and are welcome to build, join, and expand on ideas. Interdependent in the way we do that. So once again, looking at various ways of understanding can inform and really enrich the experience of working on various issues and challenges in our community. And we take care of ourselves in any way we need. So self-care is critical as well, so you don't have burnout. As our group, we came together with agreements in various ways as we understand, and I won't go through this because we've been really good about this. We ask that you try to remain on the camera as much as possible, because we want to look in the Zoom. Sometimes it looks like Hollywood squares. You know, you start losing this connection if all you see is the name or a blank screen. But we're trying to make it as interpersonal as possible. Although it can't take away the in-person aspects, but it is what the world we live in today, and utilizing technology for convenience in a lot of ways. We want you to unmute and participate, ask questions. Also, whenever with the exercises report out, raise hands if you have any particular question. And so you can see some of those components that we went over earlier. Session one, you know, we looked at, we went over the basics of ABCD. We looked at dismantling the systems. Last week, we really focused a lot on asset mapping and looking at creative alternatives in ways of approaching things, and particularly asset mapping. Today, we're going to be focused on roles in community development, power structures, the ways institutions can lead by stepping back. The justice aspect, I think we're going to move more into the fourth, our final one next Saturday, where John McKnight will be joining us to discuss an initiative of ABCD that he's been engaged with Bob, and then both with law enforcement, and I'll be talking in the judicial aspect of the courts and some of those, and how ABCD can, practitioners can engage and even help with restorative justice and some of those aspects. And then we'll end with an exercise and also try to cover all the questions that you have. Okay, so just to orientate us once again of the 6 assets, always keeping in mind, starts with individuals. Individual gifts, we all have them. We all have aspects that we can bring to the table. When you take individuals and you start bringing them together, you develop associations. where people start looking at common goals, common objectives, or at least looking at addressing certain aspects of their community and bringing those gifts to the table and start connecting the dots, figuring out how they can work together. And then, of course, associations then many times evolve into institutional aspects, or you interact. Associations can interact with institutional aspects. Also, another asset of ABCD is physical assets, the space around us. Of course, this has been broadened by technology, so you can define what that space is, be it a space in a physical sense, in a meeting hall, in a one-on-one or in person, or now utilizing Zoom and Teams and other types of technology. And you want to create an area of safe space as a physical asset so that people can feel comfortable in sharing their gifts and their ideas. You have the local economy, what I always like to call social capital, the exchange, the economics of it, social entrepreneurship, looking at those aspects. And of course, the final one that we've talked about, culture and stories, that each of us all bring a certain perspective of that. And I think last week we talked about the moth hour, story hour, looking at how to tell stories. I think that's critical as ABCD practitioners and leaders, is really telling stories. People normally don't remember facts or statistics. You can bore them to death with statistics, but what they do remember are the stories that you tell. And for the clergy in our group, that that's exactly how Christ taught, and many of the rabbis. And of course, I would imagine clergy in your sermons and things, you tell stories to relay various concepts and ideas. So in essence, we are, as ABCD practitioners, telling those stories of our community, stories about ourselves, in order to make those connections. Okay.
John, I think you're sort of getting into my area.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did I go too far? So I'm just go ahead and stop there.
You can still show the slides for
Now,
me.
let's go to the slides, okay?
Okay, because I couldn't tell because of I don't have the name. I can't see the name because the screen's over top of it.
Ah,
So I'm sorry. Go ahead.
that's okay. So good morning, everyone. I hope you're all doing well. I'm here celebrating my birthday with you. So Abe Lincoln and I were born on the same day as a few hundred years apart. So hopefully we can have some fun together for my birthday. The thing I'm going to try to do right now is to do some distinguishing between community, the idea of community, and the idea of neighborhood, which is more place-based. And so when we talk about community, as we say here, we talk about a community, a group of people who identify with and support one another. And usually they have a common interest, they share attributes, they work toward a common goal. They get defined by the strength of the connections, that they hold between each other. It's the place where our principles play out, all of our principles about justice and integrity and passion. It's where we end up coming together with a common interest. And I might stop for a second and ask you, as an audience, sort of, what about some of the communities that you belong to where you share these traits with people? Let's just have people sort of shout out a few. And John, maybe we can show everybody on the screen here for a second and then come back to the slides.
Arts community.
The arts community. Yep. And are you part of that arts community in your community?
Yes, I am.
Okay. How about other people?
I'm a member, I'm a proud member of the nerd community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what's your common interest there?
For me, I meet a lot of people who are really into Star Trek and a lot of people who are really into Magic the Gathering.
I see some people raising their hands and clapping as you're talking about the Star Trek community. Good. How about some others?
Member of a cooperative communities. I'm on the board of a food co-op and have relationships with worker cooperatives throughout the city.
Mm-hmm. Yep, with a common interest of feeding people.
I'm involved in an AARP community on safe driving.
Mm-hmm. Good. So you get the idea, it's where we're gathering as people who have common interests. I'm part of part of an aging community. I'm part of an aging men's group, that I belong to. And we discuss an awful lot of issues that are important to us. Everything from health to spirituality, and everything in between, to provide support to each other. All right, John, if we can go to the next slide. This is where we start distinguishing between the difference between sort of community and neighborhood, but there's often emerging here. But neighborhoods are places, they're a place where people live. They're places where people intersect with each other. They have identities based on who lives there. They're defined usually by boundaries such as streets or physical characteristics of some sort. A community is where people gather around a common interest, and it can be a family, an association like a number of you talked about, or an advocacy group or whatever. And they can exist in neighborhoods and they can exist across neighborhoods. ABCD is the process by which we help them converge. All right, next. So neighborhoods have a common identity. This neighborhood, I don't quite know where it came from, but it's a Wallingford neighborhood in a particular community. I'll use an example of a neighborhood that I belong to. I lived in New Haven and I belong to the East Rock Neighborhood Association. Now, and so East Rock was defined by a big rock on the northern end, and which was East Rock Park. And then on the eastern end, it was by a business street, a street of a lot of commercial activity on State Street. To the west, it was defined by Yale University and especially the Yale Divinity School, which was up the hill. And to the south was the downtown business district. And so within that, our community identity was our East Rock Neighborhood Association. And that's where we came together around common interests of keeping our neighborhood beautiful and keeping our neighborhood a good place to live, and assuring that we had a pretty diverse community. We had an awful lot of work integrating students from Yale and from Southern Connecticut State University and from the Divinity School and Albertus Magnus, all colleges that surrounded us to some degree, and making sure that we weren't too gentrified. Okay, next. We talk about working on a manageable scale. So within neighborhoods, we often form different communities. And when we talk about manageable scale, you can be too large to work on, to bring people together and work on issues. And so this is where we get down to possibly blocks, within neighborhoods, where people end up getting together. We need to have groups that are small enough to really, where everybody can be included, and a place where we can get things done. So the next one is, we talk about bumping places. And I like this. I go back to my East Rock neighborhood is that we had a bus stop right outside my house. And bus stops are places where people, they're getting together at the bus stop about the same time of day. And so you can't help starting to build some relationships at the bus stop. You know, in our neighborhood, we had a laundromat, and that laundromat is where an awful lot of people gathered to do their laundry. But they brought their guitars, they brought their saxophones, they brought their chess sets. You know, people were forming relationships there. That were bumping places. We had a drugstore right on the corner, and an awful lot of people met there. And matter of fact, one of the best connectors I ever met was the pharmacist at the drugstore, who knew everybody coming in and just knew everything about their families. If you wanted to know stuff about who was moving in or moving out, you could talk to the pharmacist and he would do it. Coffee shops, bodegas, delis, you know, where people get together. Diners. We had a diner in our neighborhood. I love diners, and it's another place where everybody knows everybody. And in certain neighborhoods, you've got bowling alleys, you've got gyms. It's places where people bump into each other. Next. So neighborhoods are places where that can create opportunities for collective action, you know, getting people together. You know, in our East Rock neighborhood in New Haven, we had an East Rock block party, you know, every year. And so we would get the neighborhood together, and we would have all the interest groups in the neighborhood would sort of bring their materials and set up booths, and, you know, all of the food places in the neighborhood would provide the food, or people who were cooking would come bring food. We had a lot of music that was going on in the neighborhood. So you could choose where you were going to get involved and where you were going to create some action in that neighborhood. We had a pretty large community garden, which is sort of another bumping into a place, each other place. But if you've ever been part of a community garden, you know that the gardeners do an awful lot of interacting with each other, have a lot of interest in food issues and things like that, and are contributors, you know, to things that go on in the neighborhood. So how about, you know, once again, let's talk a little bit, and maybe you can give some examples of your neighborhood about opportunities for collective action, or places where that we didn't talk about, maybe that people bump into each other, and places where, you know, there are common interests broken down within your neighborhood and you get things done. So some examples.
I hear you say supermarket.
I didn't talk about gifts, Benita.
No, I said supermarket, the supermarket.
Oh, the supermarket, absolutely. If there's a supermarket, you know, but it's a good place where people gather and you meet people that you know.
Bob, in our area, it's a very rural area. The population's pretty small, so the local gathering place is actually a garbage dump. Because we don't have a public service, so you physically have to drive your garbage to a location. So
Yep.
the common Saturday watering spot, so to speak.
So in rural areas, you really don't have neighborhoods, but you do have gathering places of some sort, correct?
The community I work in, it's a river on the east side of town with a park.
Mm-hmm.
Also rural.
Yeah, but that's a gathering place. People come to the river and people have picnics there and do stuff.
Just one more comment about our rural place. We have one block that's our town center and our grocery store. We had one small grocery store and it shut down. So it's been the angst of the community that we don't have that, because that would be our gathering place, kind of the center of town, but it's going to reopen. It's taking 2 years. And many of the residents have complained that that place where they used to go is gone. So it's been interesting.
Laura, it'll be interesting a little bit later when we talk about communities that are, you know, being disrupted in some way. Your community has been disrupted, and that's where the asset mapping process and the asset-based community development process comes in terms of, you know, bringing those places back to life, or, you know, starting the process of bringing them back to life. So
the third Saturdays of every month, the church across the street from my house, it does a food bank, and they line me all the way around the corner. Like everybody in the neighborhood be there. That's another place.
That's great. Yeah. Okay. There've been some things in the chat about cafes, you know, little restaurants where people bump into each other, bars, you know. I don't know about you, but it's like when I go to a restaurant, my wife and I like to eat at the bar because you have great conversations and you meet people and you form relationships, you know, so. Okay, so let's go to the next one, John. So this is just a quick one, but it's taken a place of where you start to gain an identity. You know, you gain an identity in your neighborhood and you start talking about this place matters and the people that live here matter and the people with particular interests and concerns and things that they want to have heard in the community matter. Okay, next one. So off to the left, you've got the guy bowling, you know, and this comes from a book by Robert Putnam called Bowling Alone. And the whole idea of bowling alone is he was taking a look at community associations, you know, places where people get together around common interests, and that we were losing an awful lot of participation in community groups and a lot of that came out of some of the things that are listed on the screen, that people were, you know, they were into electronics. They were doing a lot of their interacting through computers and phones and through digital instruments of some sort. You know, you talked about communities in crisis where you were moving towards single purposes land use and things like that. I noticed yesterday, I was looking at the paper, I had worked in Bridgeport for an awful long time. Bridgeport is a city of 150,000 people that had one hotel. Yesterday it closed and they're turning the hotel into downtown housing, you know, in the community. So there's a little destruction going on there. People are much more mobile. They're spending a lot more time in their cars. You know, I'm sure a lot of you lived in neighborhoods at one point in your life where you left your doors open and windows open and neighbors had keys to your house and things like that. I grew up in a community like that in Western Pennsylvania. Today, you go back there, everybody has their doors locked. People are not going in and out of each other's houses anymore. That sense of community is gone, or at least it's been modified to some degree. Professionalizing services. You know, a lot of our communities have gone into crisis because things that we used to do naturally, supporting each other, social service agencies have taken over. You know, the whole process of grieving, for example, we now have professional therapists that do grief counseling and grief work, as opposed to, you know, when neighborhoods and communities would come together when someone died or someone got injured or something went on in the neighborhood that was, you know, that wasn't working for people. I remember growing up, I played a lot of baseball growing up, and it would take me, I lived about 10 minutes from the ballpark, you know, and I would be coming home from a game at night, and it would take me an hour to get home. The reason it would take an hour to get home is that people were sitting on their porches and people were, you know, looking out on the porches, and everybody wanted to know how the game went, or they had listened to it on the radio and they wanted to celebrate with me if I had a good night of hitting, and, you know, they knew other players on the team. They wanted to know how they were doing. Those kind of things in a lot of ways are missing, you know, in our communities. And so, and you talked about your rural community that had one main street, and the main business there, the market where people were going is now closed. You know, sometimes there's a theater and the theater ends up closing. And, you know, during COVID, an awful lot of things shut down, places where people gathered because people weren't gathering, you know, and now that we're opening up a little bit, we're really looking forward to getting back at that, you know, and getting back into it. So next slide, John. So how do we get back to community? You know, how do we end up taking a look at our communities in a way? And here's where we get into some of the repetition. The main way we're talking about during this 4-week session that we're ending up doing is using the ABCD process to do that. And that starts with organizing. And the ABCD way of organizing is to start figuring out when our community is in crisis. It's discovering, all of the gifts in our neighborhood and how we mobilize those gifts to get something done. I don't want to bore you too much, but we'll take a quick run through the slides as we're taking a look at, next slide, John, next 2 slides. So as we're taking a look at the assets in the community, you saw this map. John started to run you through the map. I like the way this one's configured because it gives examples of everything in the blocks. So when you start your mapping process, you can take a look at the individuals that matter in terms of the issues you're trying to address, the associations that are involved in your community. And it gives you sort of a, do we have those types of associations in our neighborhood? Who belongs to them? What kind of gifts do they bring to our community? Do they bring to our neighborhood? And then we start talking about, the physical layout of our group. One of you talked about the river and the park by the river, that's a physical asset, your community. Does your community have institutions? In a community that's sort of getting run down, the institutions become institutions that are serving the addicted. They're serving people who are returning from incarceration, possibly. They're serving people with mental health issues, physical health issues, things like that. And, we have fewer institutions that are businesses and things like that in the neighborhood. And so, and then we talked about the economy, are the businesses there? Are we generating any form of a local economy from the people who end up living in that community? And then, John started to talk about the stories and things like that. Quick run through the rest of the slides, John. There are 3 foundational assets. Those are the 3 that we focused a lot of attention on: the individuals, associations, and institutions. Next slide. And then the supplemental assets are the ones that support those assets. The physical space, the places where people meet, sense of place, the physical neighborhood, the exchange of goods, and the culture and the stories in a community. They support the functional assets. We talk about the first one. We talk about individuals in the group. Back a slide, John. And, that's, we've talked about the gifts of individuals. This is where we do the mapping process. We find out about the people that live in our neighborhood, live in our community. What kind of gifts, what kind of things do they have to offer? We bring those gifts forward and figure out how we can mobilize those gifts in some way to help our community come back. You heard the principles over and over that everyone has something to offer. And we try to include people who are excluded. Those neighborhoods that are being run down, a lot of the people who end up living there have been excluded from the normal decision-making process in a community. And it's important that we engage them as well. In our community from Bridgeport, in Bridgeport, for example, that I worked in, we worked with a group called Credible Messengers, that we organized in our institution. And the Credible Messengers were young men and women returning from prison who we got engaged as outreach workers to work with the young people in the neighborhood to see if we could prevent them from joining gangs and joining institutions and getting involved in the negative behavior in the community. So we found a very positive way to include people who probably would have a very tough time reintegrating back into their neighborhood. Okay, the next one, John. We've talked a lot about the associations, the small informal groups, even in neighborhoods that are run down or deteriorating. There are places and people who get together in associational life, and it's where individuals take their gifts and end up mobilizing some of their gifts. So the associations become a very powerful place where we pool, individual gifts. Okay, the next one, the institutions. The institutions are very important to engage. We'll be talking a little bit, later on today about how we engage institutions to lead by stepping back. Leading by stepping back is sort of a concept by which, and we'll talk about this more this afternoon when we play a game this afternoon. But to give you some sense of it is, it's asking a few questions. And it's asking first the questions of what can people in our community do? This is institutions asking our question. What can they do that they can do themselves to benefit what's going on? And we shouldn't be replicating those things in our institution. We should be facilitating and celebrating people doing things individually. The next thing is, what can individuals with all their skills and all the things that they have do in concert with us, do in collaboration with us, in our neighborhood. So working together, what can we accomplish? But it's also sort of stepping back because we're listening to the residents of that neighborhood, the residents of that community first, to find out, what their needs are, what they have to offer and things like that. And then what the institutions do is supplement that. They don't replace it, they supplement it. And so it sort of can multiply your resources. And then the next one, the physical spaces. This is once again, this is just the place where it happens. We started off talking about neighborhoods. The neighborhoods have boundaries, but people have commitments to neighborhoods. Neighborhoods have names. We had 27 neighborhoods in Bridgeport. All of them had names, everything from, well, I remember where a good example of this, when I went to grad school in Cincinnati, and I did a lot of work with a group called the Over the Rhine Neighborhood Association. And so why over the Rhine? That neighborhood was bordered by the Ohio River and, was sort of the first circle, first ring outside the downtown business district. And it was called Over the Rhine because it's where all the Germans who came from Germany, who settled in Cincinnati, lived there, and they named that neighborhood the Over the Rhine neighborhood. The Germans are gone, it's very much an African-American community now and an Appalachian community now that's in that area. And it's a pretty poor neighborhood. So, but, those are physical spaces, a lot of good organizing going on in that neighborhood. The exchange we talked about earlier. This is starting, I talked a little bit, I think a couple of weeks ago about the Greenwood area in Tulsa, which was one of the best examples of an exchange where people really build off the business skills of the people that lived in that neighborhood to make it an incredibly successful neighborhood. When neighborhoods start coming back, it's very important to start getting at the entrepreneurial skills that people might have, the things that people can do, in that neighborhood, and getting them support for doing business in the neighborhood. This is a good place where existing institutions can support the growth of the entrepreneurial spirit of the people that live in a neighborhood. And then the last one, of course, are the stories and how important the stories are. I talked last week about the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative and how they collected the stories of the neighborhood. They put them on murals. They used the arts community to put them on these big murals on walls, in their neighborhood. But then they also produced a book, and someone put in the chat last week those stories and how they were documented in there and how important they are. Any questions about this process? Any questions about community and neighborhood, the difference between the two, and maybe some examples of where this process of the asset development stuff has worked well, maybe in reviving a particular part of your neighborhood or a particular part of the communities you're involved in. Anyone?
Yeah, I think so. I live in Logan Square in Chicago, and it's really easy to kind of become siloed in Chicago. It's difficult to get some places on CTA and all that, so it's harder to find community sometimes. But something that we do in the neighborhood in the park is it's a farmers market, and it's really become like a gathering place for people on those weekends when it's open, when it's nice enough to be open, and there's like folk music. People bring their instruments and they just kind of hang out and actually talk to each other. So it's really a pleasant way to experience the neighborhood.
Yeah, yeah. Logan Square is a really good example. Amber, you've got your hand up?
Yeah, hi. I live in a very rural community, and a lot of retired people have been moving to the region, which has proven to be an amazing benefit because of the skills they bring to an agricultural rural community. And at some point, the county was going to shut down our one park. And all the community got involved and cleaned up the park and did some fundraising and really, stood together to say how important our park was. And that really boosted community morale. Our park is better than ever. We ended up getting grants and rebuilding the bathrooms, which were falling down. And there's a lot of great stuff going on in our community. And that process really served to catalyze people being aware of how much we're doing and how we can connect all the different pieces that are going on all over. So
Amber, take another step with that. You mentioned how that work on the park acted as a catalyst, for other things. I think that's a terrific example of how, when you get together as a community and you do something successful, that people start feeling their oats, and they start feeling like they can make other changes in their community. They did this, they challenged the institutions that were going to shut down the place, and now all of a sudden you get the chance to take a look at a lot of other things in your neighborhood or in your community and do something.
That was the real nutshell version. It goes farther and has some interesting, you mentioned institutions, and as part of that process, some of the community members applied for a grant from the Ford Family Foundation to help cover the bathroom. And that's part of how that got funded. And by doing all of this, it caught their attention, and they appointed a facilitator to come and conduct meetings around the community and see what needed, what we wanted or needed, how they could support us. And we ended up asking for, the gift that keeps on giving. And so the main group of people that had organized to facilitate this park restoration and saving our park, they are now paid through a grant from the Ford Family Foundation to work on all these issues. The interesting thing is now community sentiment is like, oh, they're all talk and big ideas. And anyway, it's like the scale or the pendulum. Now we have this organization, but even though they're pretty new, there's already this reputation that there's a lot of this. Sometimes
Amber, they need to be taught
some
this
exciting
concept.
and highly impactful actions.
Yeah, they need to be taught the concept of leading by stepping back. It's like, okay, you had all this success, and so what do we do in this country? We form an institution, we form an organization, and where the neighborhood itself, without the institutions, until you got to the Ford Family Foundation and got some support for it, were doing this all themselves. And so the institutions step in to almost replace that community involvement rather than building off of it, which is what they should be doing,
Right.
Yeah. When we talked to all of the young men and women who were coming back from prison about, what they needed, that was used to get them engaged in solving the problems of their community. We as the institution weren't going to solve those problems.
Yeah.
So how about some other people? Any other examples you might have?
Yeah.
Nope, go ahead.
Go ahead,
I
Brent.
can wait. I can go next.
I thought I'd just share one that's a bit unusual. It's in a town next to me. It's a beachfront, a town that has beachfront property. And when we had huge hurricanes a long time ago, the beachfront area was damaged significantly. And the town, which is it's a mixture of wealth and those that don't have as much, but there was a large group of people that wanted that beachfront to go back to its natural habitat. However, if that had happened, many of the residents in that town would not be able to access the property, especially the older adult, and that's kind of my passion. And so there was a big fight between these two entities as to who was going to win, allowing this property to go back to beachfront natural habitat, or rebuild areas to address and encourage the population in that town to have access to the property. And in the end, the group that won was a group that wanted access to the majority of people on the property. So they rebuilt sidewalks, they protected part of the environment as they wanted to, so that came out. They added tables, so for people with wheelchairs, they could roll up to these tables that are surrounded by sand, but they're on a cement property, and cars could drive close enough for people to get to that area. They put in paths so wheelchairs could go down close to the beach if they needed to. So it was interesting to kind of see the dynamics in the town. It took quite a while for that to get resolved, but I just thought it was, kind of listening to all these aspects, what happened in that community as a result.
Yeah, it had a sort of a mutating effect almost, where you kept building on it, then other things happened. Okay, Benita, you were trying to talk, I know.
Yeah, so like in the city of Philadelphia, they doing like gentrification, and a lot of people are losing their homes because of this. But it's this one area of Philadelphia called Kensington, and the reason why I admire them so much because they doing the same thing, but they're doing it within their community. All community members have a say. So if they build a senior house, if they fix up a park, if they put up lighting, they go through the community members and they work as a team. So within that little section of Philadelphia called Kensington, even though it's known for the popularity of drugs and the things that's going on down there, it's a sense of community where they got their own stuff going on. And I was fortunate enough to be in a meeting on Wednesday night, and I was amazed at how much stuff they accomplished within the last 10 years in that community. So the same thing the city of Philadelphia doing, the only difference is in this community, people are not losing their homes. They can stay in their homes and they have a right and they got to say about what's going on in their neighborhood. Anything that get done, they go to the neighbors first and they got to say what's going on. And I think that's just like, that is so amazing. And I go around other parts of the city, I'm like, why we're not doing this, in different areas, but this part got it together. And like I said, and it got the worst reputation for the drugs and stuff. But one thing I can say for sure, and two for certain, they are doing popular things down there, building homes, houses, senior houses, parks, and I actually seen it for myself.
Excellent.
So,
where is
Excellent.
that?
I thought
Can I
that would
ask
have been a
again?
good example.
Where is that again? Can I ask?
Oh, in Philadelphia, it's called Kensington, the Kensington section of Philadelphia.
Thank you.
Robbie, did you have something to say?
No, I was just asking what the community that is that Benita's in.
Okay, so Brad. You're muted, Brad.
Sorry about that. So I've only caught up with part of what I missed last time. So we may have talked about this last time, and just say so, and I'll pick it up in the other way. But when you were talking about John, when you were talking about in the one of your recent conversations here about the institution stepping back. The Ford Foundation was the thing, and the institution stepping back.
Right.
That I would really like to know some help. I would really like some help on thinking about that for my own institution, as well as others.
What is that, Brad? What's your
church, the Episcopal Church?
Oh.
And so we have a real old stand, as do many churches. We have a real old standing sort of benevolent, toxic charity-ish, kind of way of interacting with communities. And obviously there are a whole lot. I can just imagine. I've got one community in mind that I'm working with right now that is in an early stage, a reasonably early stage of gentrification. And so one of the things that we hope to be able to do is to be a catalyst within that community in some way of sort of bringing things together. My point, my question, and if it's going to come up later, we can talk about it. But my question is around what are some other ways, even using that Ford Foundation situation as a Ford Family Foundation situation? What might that? Let's assume that the Family Association did go in there and sort of try to take over a little bit. How else might they have done that?
John, do you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I can try.
Okay.
So being an Episcopal priest myself, engaged in 2016, we had massive floods in southern West Virginia where we had loss of life and a lot of damage. And one of the things, of course, the church was, the diocese was very, very concerned and wanted to be engaged, and they were. But one of the steps that we took was not to come in as the great saviors, in the sense of resources and people and connections and everything and a lot of times people would automatically assume that would happen. Instead, it was more of an individual level where I went in and I worked with the community using asset-based community development, where the church has provided a place for meetings, but not necessarily offer up all these resources and ideas and things and basically become part of the conversation, the community of looking at, first of all, what are the unmet needs? Let's do an inventory. What's happening? What is it that we already have? What assets do we have available? And what do we need help with? And out of that, there was formed what is called greater long-term recovery committees. And we formed these, and they were made up of different organizations, associations, individuals, not just with the church, but kind of a United Nations, a multiple aspect of this, people coming together, looking at the unmet needs in their community and looking at the assets and connecting the dots. At that point, those long-term, and each county would claim their own. So you had Greater Greenbrier Long-Term Recovery Committee, Greater Clay, Greater Kanawha, the counties. And the reason is the people wanted to come back greater than what they were. So the idea, but out of that, actually formed relationships where the church provided space, eventually resources, but not initially, did not come in with a bunch of resources. And you we let people wrestle with this and not try to solve it for them. So remember, we talk about this a lot in the area of coaching. You don't want to treat people like objects. Don't do things to people. And so often the church will do that. This is how we're going to do it. We know it works. We're going to do it here. We just do it to them. We don't treat people like recipients. Just don't do things for them. Okay, we're just going to take care of you. Everything will be fine. We're here to save the day. That's toxic charity. You set up a meal, you get your volunteers, you provide the food, and all the people that are coming, all they do is eat. But if you treat people like resources, you bring them together and say, look, here's a problem. What can we do? What can we do collectively? Well, I can do this, I can do that. And so we found people saying, well, we can do drywall, we can provide volunteers, we can provide somebody clothing, we can provide and let others give space to come forward with their gifts. And that's what Bob is talking about stepping back and leading by stepping back is because you don't want to be the first one in to provide all these things. You want to be there saying, look, I'm here as part of the conversation. I'm trying to figure this out like you, and let's figure this out together and see what we can do. So, Brad, I would say that it's really a mindset in your community that you as a church body, provide space, safe space, maybe have invite of conversation, but don't offer up resources initially. I mean, just don't say, we might be able to get that, but what do we have to work with right now? And let someone struggle. With our children, we didn't ride the bike for them. We would put them on the bike and let them struggle. They'd have to fall over a couple times, and it'd be easy if we always would just do it for them, but you got to let people struggle with it, because once they do, they can become very frustrated because they want someone to do it for them. Okay. But if you let them struggle with it, even though they're frustrated, that thing, well, you can go ahead and do it. Why are you making me do this? When they accomplish it, the satisfaction is so much better than if someone had done it for them. The empowerment of that person is, I did it together, did it with others. And so that's what I would say. If you look at it from a mindset of approach as a church, and not come in with all these resources up front and ideas.
John, I think that's a great example. Brad, was that helpful?
That was very helpful. I was thinking as you were talking, John, I know we need to move on. I was thinking as you were talking that when the long-term recovery committees started to be assembled and put together, that would be a sort of key spot, I think, a spot where I might want to, I just speak for myself personally, where I might want to get more involved in organizing those, being the champion for those, doing all of that kind of stuff, and maybe even bringing in leadership for those, or something like that. That might be a key spot where I personally might cross that line and go down a road that was not nearly so helpful.
Good. Thanks, Brad.
Yeah.
Patricia, you've got the last word before we take a little break.
Okay. The area on the south side of Chicago the beach is primarily white residents, and we organized in a Latino and African American community, working with the teenagers. We taught them to plant trees. We planted 10,000 trees, where they brought family members and community members. We had buses, and the kids were teaching parents, handicapped little kids, and they did all the planting. And my goal was for the young people to say, this is mine, I own this. And they did. And so they come back with their parents and their grandparents and their kids. And we have this whole area, and that beach is now integrated.
Good, terrific. So hang on to these. If you've got, I'm sure there are a lot of other examples. When we play this game this afternoon, and we can place things on, what people can do for themselves, what they can do collaborating with professionals in government, and then what's unique to government, you'll be able to plug these examples in, and we can have a lot more conversation. Evis, I know you're next, but we want to take about a 5-minute, 10-minute break.
Yeah, it could be like a almost 9-minute break. So just come back at 15.
So we'll come back at the 15. All right, good. Thank you, everybody.
Actually go to the ABCD Institute website. So this is like a lot of the things that we have been talking about of the ABCD values. And this is something that actually we just like, as a board members, and also we have like stewards and people, our community partners. So we had a retreat, and we, for like a while, worked on ABCD values. So before we didn't have any particular values in our website, and part of the conversations that we were having as a board and as a stewards is that you can do ABCD for anything, right? So ABCD, creation of associations and using institutions. It could be used by a group to maybe do something that is like negative in the community. So the idea is like, okay, so how we talked about the values of ABCD, that not only is a tool that it can be used for anything, right? Which it is, because again, recognizing assets and mobilizing assets can be done for anything, right? So the idea is again thinking about values, and then we came up with these different values that you already have heard. So what is start with like the gifts of people and communities, and then just like build on the relationship for mutual support, thinking about like value a small grassroots organizations, right, and groups, and also the local to be able to make change. So that's kind of a lot what like Bob was talking about, of like ABCD in a way is like when you have together this relationship between like community and neighborhood, right? So there's neighborhoods where there's, you know, geographic boundaries, but communities are like people together there. So how we can value that particular scale to create change, because always we're thinking about when we think about structural changes, we might think about the economy, about politics, about things that might belong to the federal government and decision making at like larger levels, right? So here is like ABCD, the way that it operates, it really values the neighborhood and this in kind of like more smaller scales to be able to again create change. Not that we cannot use it, but again, with the asset mapping is, some communities have done it at the state level, but when we look at examples and models, it's mostly the, is local, right? And then so we have that we nurture like again, citizen led action. And as today, we're talking about work for equity and justice. And we have like the other ones that we have been, you know, discussing throughout all this process, but I just wanted to reiterate that today we are like working on this, on equity and justice, which is something that we are trying to emphasize in the last couple of years. So we will go now to do like an exercise. And I kind of like maybe went a little bit further, but I did post some text for a volunteer to read in there. So I need 2 volunteers, volunteer number 1 and volunteer number 2. Is anyone who wants to be volunteer number 1? I posted in the chat something that you will read. I don't know, Patricia, I see that you are unmuted. Do you want to read the volunteer number 1 on the chat? Oh, I have a volunteer, Mike. Mike raised his hand. Oh, great. So you can be volunteer number 1, but I still need a volunteer number 2 so we can do this in a more smooth way. And I see 2 hands, but like I saw first Nicole. So so I have again, Mike will read this first and Nicole will read it second. And what I want you to do is just like close your eyes and just absorb this story that Mike and Nicole are going to tell us. Thanks, Mike.
Okay. Picture this. It's Monday. You're embarking on your ride to work. You hop in the saddle and pedal out of the garage, 4 blocks down your residential street, then 15 blocks down a traffic-calmed back street, tree-lined and tranquil. As you approach downtown, you turn into the city's new protected bike lane, The last 2 miles recently installed to complete a network from your neighborhood directly to the business district. The lane is buffered by planters and the subtle scent of flowers tickles the air. You arrive at work and lock your bike up in the bike locker without having to lift it, strolling into the office, energized and ready for the day. In the very same cities, poorer regions, where the majority of residents are people of color, many streets don't even have sidewalks or crosswalks, let alone a bike lane. Appreciate it as a cyclist.
Thank you so much, Mike. And then Nicole.
Now picture this. It's Monday. You're embarking on your ride to work. The whizzing of fast-moving cars and transport trucks is an assault on your sleepy senses as you carry your bike down the steps. You hop in the saddle and head off down the sidewalk, where you'll remain for 15 bumpy blocks until it abruptly ends, throwing you onto the barely existent shoulder of a 50-mile-per-hour or 80-kilometer-per-hour arterial road. You ride over cracked asphalt and broken glass, swerving narrowly to avoid potholes and road debris, while motorists lay on their horns as they pass you by a margin of a foot. When you're finally able to leave the arterial road after what feels like the narrow escaping of death, you take sidewalks and back alleys for the remainder of the ride. You arrive at work, lock your bike to a fence, and pray it'll still be there when you get back. You get to work stressed but alive.
Well, thank you so much. So why you think that these again stories we're trying to illustrate? And this could be anyone, so I'm going to stop sharing for a minute. It could be anyone. How do you feel about hearing this? I don't know if some of you can identify. I know it's very specific, biking. I'm an urban planning professor, so all my examples are like something that has to do with planning. But yeah, maybe I just wanted to hear your reactions. And I have here the diverse difference between physical environments. All right, we were talking about neighborhood, right?
I used to commute by bike in Toledo, which is a small city or a medium-sized city. But I remember we would go through neighborhoods that were both of these. And you would, it was high stress on one street, and you kind of like held your breath and all that stress until you got to a bike lane where you could finally breathe and pedal. And it was like night and day sometimes. And yeah, there was a very physical like difference inside of me. I would be tense in one and then relaxed in the other. And I felt both of those things as we read them.
Thanks for sharing, Matt. Anyone else?
Hello. Hi.
Hi.
In the first example, I wondered how did they come up with such a beautiful plan? I don't bike ride at all, but it just sounded idyllic.
Yeah, well, we might speak of lots of investments, right? Than downtown areas as opposed to other neighborhoods and so on. Anyone else? Yeah. Maybe she wasn't unmuting herself. All right, so we're gonna keep the conversation. So part of this is like, again, thinking, because we showed you first like the deficit map, right? And the asset map. But what we want to also talk about is that that those things in a way do coexist. So it's not about, again, ABCD is not about emphasizing, or it's about emphasizing the assets, right? Because we can use that, we can mobilize the assets, but we cannot ignore the inequities that exist. And we cannot ignore that many of these inequities do exist at the neighborhood level. And the scale that ABCD operates is that neighborhood level, but we understand that there's or cities are segregated oftentimes by like race and class, and that people have like differential access, political access, but also in terms of social capital and all kinds of things, right? Depending many times in this like particular scale. So we want to talk a little bit again more about the idea of like equity, and we had this example again of like an African-American neighborhood next to like Rutgers University, and how again there were like plans there to like beautify the street and use like some of the assets that the space already like provided. So obviously we can make neighborhoods better by uncovering what are some of the assets, right? And also the communities mobilizing and doing things themselves. But we always have this like tale of like the two cities, as we have like talked about before. And this is kind of like the dilemma, right? That people and community has like deficiencies and needs, but they also have like these assets and capacities. And we want to concentrate on that, but again, not ignoring that it's like real inequities. So we are going to do like an exercise, and I will post, you can find the link in the, like it says like, find this form here. You need to make a copy for yourself. And if, you know, if you cannot get this, just like find a piece of paper and a pen, and then just do this. So we are gonna do this like by yourselves for like, I think about 7 minutes, and see if you need more time. But basically here, the example that I will show you, it has to do with biking in particular, right? But you can think about anything that you want. So this next slides I will show you. So thinking about, you know, geography and education. So this is an identity map, class, ethnicity, and so on. So some things that I put here, when I was thinking about geography, so I live in a majority minority neighborhood, which, you know, isn't that great for biking, or again, for taking transit, or for even walking on the streets. And you might have like thinking about education. So in my case, I have like a PhD, middle class. I put here, and this might be, you know, depending on your own perception, but I could say I'm like mixed race, which I am, but, you know, people see me walking down the street, and I look white until I basically open my mouth. So there's some privilege to that. But in terms of my ethnicity, I'm like Latina, Puerto Rican, being Puerto Rican American citizen, speak, you know, English and Spanish. In terms of like culture, you can put anything that you want. But, you know, in this case, I was thinking about me biking, and that's not something in the community that is really, you know, didn't really grow up doing that at all. I do not have a disability. I'm Christian, cannot put my age in a range in there. So I'm anywhere from 18 to 65, and then female, straight. So again, just like do an identity map for yourself. I will stop sharing this for a minute. And then I will put the link to this exercise. And then the idea is that you will copy that. And then you can do your own. So I'm sharing in there. And then if I share this, basically, if you go to the edit and then you make a copy, you make one in your folder, and you can rename it or whatever or you can just like download it and do it on your own computer. We don't really need your identity map, but basically when you click in here, you might just type just anything here, right? So I don't know, living single family home. Some people are on house, right? So that's kind of like what I'm asking you to do. Are there any questions before we move kind of forward? No, okay. So I'll give you yeah, just like I said, like 7 minutes to do this. You might need less. So let's give you 5 and then check in, and it could become 7, just depending if you haven't finished. So just have 5 minutes. All right, I think everyone is getting back here.
That was so short.
It was like super short. Even though we did it, I give you 2 more minutes. Because 4 minutes is very short. Yeah, so I hope that you had a nice conversation. We're just gonna have like maybe 3 people report back on what were some of those conversations. I also wanted to point to Mike put on the chat another tool from the Learning Lab that seems very interested on the Power Flower. All right, so let's hear maybe from, yeah, three groups. And I see that Chanel has her hand up.
Yeah, just I'm going to be very quick and brief. We noticed that when we're looking at these identity maps, that kind of have a problem with them, because really, you know, I know because I worked in the government before that we're classified under 4 racist groups. Why aren't we just being human? We have all these labels and identifiers, but maybe that's part of the problem, to where we're still putting all these categories and groups instead of looking at us as just the human race.
Okay, yeah. And there's like many exercises. There's another identity map that kind of like gets to what you're saying, because it looks at, it doesn't give you any particular categories. And I will put it on the chat. You can also be able to use it. I use this all the time with my students. It's mostly about what do you care about and who you are, and what are those things that were given to you that you cannot change anything about, you know, being this or being that according to society, but you might choose other things about yourself. But thanks for sharing that point, Chanel. And then I see Robbie has his hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment from her question, and just saying, I think in these spaces of diversity, questions like this are actually, I definitely agree with you about how we put races against each other and that they're a social construct. I 100% understand that. But I think as a white person, trying to help white people understand their privilege and the power dynamics within culture, it's helpful to see this, so that white people can begin to understand that, yes, they are individual, but they're part of a group that's part of a system. And so I think it's just helpful in these exercises, but I do understand the question that she's asking is it's against a systemic issue. So it's a bigger conversation.
Yes, absolutely. Anyone else? I see like some things on the chat. I don't know if anyone wants to verbalize what they put on the chat, or is there another person that likes to make a comment?
I just wanted to, I want to make the,
yeah, go ahead, Matt, and then Jennifer.
I just want to make the comment that it was actually sort of hard to look at privileges and disadvantages after spending, you know, the last couple of weeks looking at assets, that everybody's an asset. When we're like, when somebody is left out or seen as a disadvantaged in some way, it seems to be outside of the thinking that we've been training to do for the last couple of weeks. And so it was almost a hard mindset to get back into. So I just wanted to verbalize this kind of dichotomy that happened that I struggled with.
Right. And again, like that's also like why I put it kind of flexible, because there's some things that society might say, you know, there's things that you might be disadvantaged because of this, and maybe sometimes you also experience that in your own personal life. But you can always think about, okay, this is an asset that I have. And one example that I have with that is like, obviously, like I speak two languages, Spanish and English, and it's a huge asset, right? But in some circumstances, I might have gotten negative comments, or that people can understand me, or that these things. And obviously, there's all kinds of. I try to not internalize those things, but it's important to also like recognize that. So that's what we're trying to do. It's like, you know, all these things could be seen as obviously assets and their own personal identity. But what we're trying to do is just kind of bring this perspective of thinking about equity and justice into ABCD, because to be honest, we haven't, because we are so like driven thinking about assets, right? Sometimes we might ignore like a little bit of these structural conversations that are like very important as well. But thank you for yeah, just like expressing that there might be a little bit of like change with today's talk. And then I see that Shahid has a hand up, and then Gigi, and also Jennifer, like you had your hand up. And I think that with that, maybe we can just like continue. So again, Jennifer, then Shahid, and then Gigi.
Yeah, I was in a group with Sheila, and I think that she can probably express this more eloquently than I can. But something that we talked a lot about was the idea of like white woman privilege, and how like for me as a white woman, that there are certain things that I can sort of get away with without being labeled as an angry blank woman. Like I can say certain things, and I'm just perceived as being like maybe like assertive, or like I know what I want. And then, you know, if a woman of a different background were to do the same thing, she's labeled an angry woman, and sort of I think discounted, and her opinion isn't really respected.
Yeah, thanks for sharing
Can I
that.
just follow up with that, with Jennifer said?
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah, I would like to also just continue that statement, because I want to be clear about which woman is going to be angry, and it's the angry Black woman. And I made my reference to how our former First Lady was treated, even with her enormous education, her view of the world, and her popularity. I just wanted to make sure that we're clear about how that we say diversity, but it's not driven into diversity. And that's what we need to be whole, because if I'm moving into a predominantly white neighborhood, I'm not really sometimes welcomed in essence in certain ways, even with my background, with my education, and with my knowledge. So it's because of the color of my skin that can, you know, hold me back from being an asset to that environment. So I just wanted to make that quite clear. Thank you for letting me speak.
Thanks, Shayla. And then we had like Shahid, and then Gigi, or vice versa. we can have you first, Gigi.
Yeah. Beauty before age, please, Gigi. Go ahead.
Yes. Oh, thank you. That was so sweet. I would like to say to the host here that I found that exercise very useful, and I went into it thinking, "Oh God, here we go again." But I got a couple of ahas from it, because the person that was in it with me had different ways of describing herself that I hadn't even thought of. Even though it was the same word, the way she described it was very different from what I would have written. And I realized that people are thinking these things. And I love the idea of us doing the self-examination first before we start going out and talking about going to others, because it's good to know that, if you are a straight person, and now you want to go and speak to trans people, you need to understand how to speak to those people. So yes, we're all humans, but I feel that we're all unique as well as the same. And so in order for me to talk with you, I need to know what we have in common as well as what we don't. And the better I know myself, the better job I would do as a ABCD person, person who wanted to promote those ideas in the community. So that I thought it was, oddly enough, it was simple, but it was good.
Thank you so much, Gigi. And then Shahid.
I appreciate that, Gigi, Sheila, and everyone who went before. I shared my time with Chanel, and we struggled in a healthy way. And the area of the struggle that I can own for myself is making my identity around kind of like qualifiers that are used to justify like what I'm entitled to or not entitled to. And so looking at this, it's like I couldn't see myself in any of it. I was like, the most, if not all of those areas, I've experienced like very, very unique oppression around. And other folks that I've been with in community and in life. And when we congregate in a way and we level and resonate with one another, it isn't these qualifiers that come up that help us really get for ourselves who one another is or what is there to possibly discover. It seemed very like colonial in a way. And then it's like, this is, I felt for myself like, man, this doesn't speak to my identity at all. When I think my identity, these aren't the things that I kind of like point out. And that's just for myself. And so I struggled in a good way with the exercise. I believe it reminded me of other things that I tend to, that bring me to life.
Yeah, thank you so much. And again, there's like so many of these exercises. I think, part of it is just like thought provoking, right? And then just like being able to do a reflection, and, sometimes we might struggle, sometimes, again, it's just depending on the exercise, but part of it is just having a discussion, right, about all these things within ABCD. So thank you so much for your thoughts. So here, to end this session before we go out for lunch, I think that many of you have probably have seen this. We're thinking about equity and equality, that we have one of these persons that cannot see anything, and one might not need the box. So the idea is like, we give the box to someone to then have more equity. At the same time, these things are not that simple. I mean, there's a lot of philosophical conversations about equity and equality. Many times we do want equity, especially when you're thinking about the social justice system. If someone, again, murders someone, we think about it in very specific ways, regardless of that person, socioeconomic status and all kinds of things, right? So these conversations are really complicated, and there's a lot of contradictions, and we could talk about it, and for, let's say, a whole class for 16 weeks only on this, and looking at different philosophers and all that. But at least for the purposes of where we are talking about, is that we are recognizing that people might need something else that what might be provided to them, and we might say, well, this could be according to all kinds of things, right? So it doesn't have to only be in this very strong categories as we were thinking about it in the previous exercise. So this is, thinking about the biking example, right? It's kind of showing people might have different size bikes, right? And again, there might be many, this is kind of like a very simple example, but we could think about together about many of the examples that we have like experienced. And I tend to think a lot about, institutions and what institutions can do, because I do work a lot with government. And this is just kind of like an example from like bike share in Chicago. So they did notice that, and like doing research and looking at the stations used for the bike share program, that the majority were like male and young and like middle and higher income with a college degree. And there was not a lot of like bike share stations in the lower income neighborhoods. But at the same time, we have a transportation system that is like subsidized by taxpayer, but people might be missing in some of the opportunities for mobility, for health, or even the economic benefits. So they started to think about equity, and they creating like the city like a better bike share partnership, in where the bike shares program were like placed in the parks mostly. So it was like mostly about recreation, and then 200 stations were added there. And then there was like a reduced like membership fee for low income residents. People didn't have to show like credit cards as collateral, because that's kind of like requirements. And then people could get a card for that, like in gas stations and in other places in the community. They could do like cash payments. They might get like a free helmet. They started to do advertisements in billboards when thinking about, instead of like having everything online. And then people will sign up for promotions. They try to bridge like language barriers, and they also the residents, all this they doing with participation from residents. But the residents, they also created or came up with the idea of like ambassador program, in where they will get like a free membership to this, but then they will talk to others about it. And they organize like rides and bike riding classes. And it was again like a cool partnership between people in the community and the government. So that might be a way of like, again, thinking about equity. I did share with you like this link. So John is going to have like discussion after lunch. We're going to come back like at 12:40 or whatever you are, 11:40, 1:40. And you could have the time to watch this. We'll be happy to play it if people need that, like last time. But we also give it to you for send this in the email. So I will post this on the chat. Let's see if I can.
All right, welcome back, everyone. I'll give you a couple seconds here to reconnect. Time flies, doesn't it? All right. Are you able to see the power to the people, power to the planet slide? Is okay, good. All right. All right, good. Well, welcome back. We're going to be talking about ABCD and power. And we're going to go over that and then we'll actually discuss the video. And then we'll have an exercise where you'll go into small groups to look at ways in which we can, how do you make the invisible visible? So looking at the social services model that many of us are very much used to, particularly if we worked in government and not-for-profit organizations, charitable organizations, This is kind of the model in which we function, we actually work from. And then this is beside that is the ABC approach that we've learned here. So in the social services model, we look at the needs, the deficits. We've talked a lot about that, and we focus in on the needs. Where the ABC approach is the opposite. We focus on the assets first and foremost, not the discredit or discount the needs, but that's not the first thing we approach it as. In the social services model, we normally respond to problems. We're not necessarily proactive, we're reactive. Reactive in the sense of reacting to a problem, and that's when we assemble. But the ABCD approach is that we build from opportunities. And we don't look at necessarily the problems as problems, but more as challenges or opportunities. Also, as social services model, we focus as more charitable or charity orientation, where ABCD, we see it more as investment opportunities or orientation. Social services, we look at the agencies to solve our problems. What type of government agencies can come to basically help us with this situation. But ABCD, we look at ways in which we can do associations of bringing individual talents and gifts together and emphasize associations. So social services focuses on individuals, where ABCD focuses on community. Normally in social services, of course, goals. A goal is service, where ultimately ABCD, what we look for are ways to empower, to give agency to individuals. Our social services model, power comes from credentials, what degrees you have, or what your work history is, or what you've accomplished, or how much money you've acquired, whatever those credentials are. Where ABCD focuses, it says that power is all about relationships. Also in social services programs, we always have a program for everything. But what we say in ABCD is that a program's never changed anybody, and tell you the truth, it really has never helped anybody. What the answer is, and what's helped people are people. People help people. Social services says people are clients, where ABCD says people are citizens. So you'll see here, we've talked about this, about the resident power ladder, and I've mentioned about, I think the first Saturday, to talk about the pothole, and how instead of the elected official fixing the pothole or getting it arranged to be fixed, but instead reaches out and says, hey, let's do this together. Let's walk through this process together. And it empowers an individual so that they're the ones that actually solve the pothole problem with the help of the elected official. Well, so the first rung of the ladder, and this is how we want to climb in our communities, where we see residents as recipients. Remember, I talk about we're doing things for them. So they receive services or information that we provide, that we give them. Taking the next rung up, residents are seen as information sources. So, you put them as part of you poll them, put them as part of a focus group of some sort. You ask their opinion, you fill out a survey, whatever it is, they become just information sources, as you then will go off and say, okay, well, I will take care of this problem for you. A lot of our elected officials and government agencies treat us this way. Then if they're really the next rung up is to take the residents and, okay, well, let's make you advisors or try to turn you into advocates for this particular issue. How often do we get emails or phone calls? Call your congressperson or call your senator about this issue. You know, the idea of making you an advocate to give advice, saying this is what should be done to a governing body. You know, go down and speak before the city council, you know, become an advocate on this behalf. The top rung, though, is where we really want to get for as far as resident power in ABCD is the residents in control, that people have self-agency, that they have control of setting their own goals and planning and the implementation. And that's the power structure. And that's the ultimate level in the area of ABCD. We talked about the coaching model, and you can see this graph is very telling. You know, the first is we're doing things to communities. So the idea that, you know, we're going to do it like medical models. You know, we're going to do this operation, we're going to do this test. You know, that's the first aspect. Where the second is instead of doing things to people, treating them like objects, we do things for them, treating them like recipients or consumers. That's usually the charitable model. And Brad, you know, we talked about that aspect of it in church. You know, we're going to feed you, we're going to clothe you, we're going to visit you, we're going to do these things for you. Then the next one is, instead of doing that to them or for them, we want to do things with them. And this helps the idea of co-production, of collaborative co-production, coming together, empowering, getting people familiar with the process of working in a certain space or certain context. But the ultimate aspect is looking at the one doing it by us, for us, doing it by the community. You can see that alongside her. It's on the bottom right corner. And that's where we have efforts of truly, it's community led. It's for the people, by the people, of the people, and with the people. It encompasses really all those aspects, but it's the aspect of empowerment. So again, going back to the neighborhood map, you know, we saw this before, you know, looking at the aspect of unemployment, all these deficits. We see all these problems that are present. But in the ABCD world, what we want to see is through these things, we want to see opportunities. And we want to look at it in our neighborhoods through that lens of assets. Once again, looking at assets, and this is a model we've seen many, many times of looking at our 6 assets and how do we break those down? How do we connect them? Or as the doc or the TED Talk talks about the roving listener, the connector. How do we become those roving listeners and connectors in our community, utilizing these 6 aspects of our asset mapping? So here's what we're going to do. First, I'll just go ahead and see. Let me get this so I can see it. What I want to do is want to talk a little bit about want us to come together and share with each other our thoughts on the TED Talk. And I thought they had a slide there. Oh, there it is. Yeah. So our TED Talk that we saw over lunch, or if you had it earlier, I want us to kind of share in the larger group, have a larger group discussion. What stood out to you? And also look at how this can play out into your organization or community. So I'll stop sharing And we'll take a few minutes to talk about the TED Talk and said what out of that stood out to you, and how did you connect it to your organization, your community, your neighborhood, or what are some thoughts that it helped generate of maybe your approach to certain challenges or investment opportunities in your community? So talk to me a little bit. Go ahead and unmute and feel free to share.
I think something that stood out to me was something that was like really, it was like a little like microsecond in the video, but when he was talking about sort of like the kid, that kid's experience in school, he said that he felt like they had given up on him when they put him in the hallway to color. And like that just like really stood out, just because I've done that to kids before, and it wasn't that I had given up on them, it was that I just needed to like focus on the students that I was with, or I felt like they needed some cool down time. But it's just, and I know that it wasn't like the macro point of the video, but that just really sort of like changed my perspective and made me think about like the way that those kinds of actions can be perceived, even if it's not intended, and how that can affect other people's sense of self-worth.
Good. Thank you, Jennifer. Yeah, thank you. Shahid?
I was telling Gigi in the chat how enlivening the video was for me. Spoke a lot to the comments that I shared earlier with just identification. I love that he started out with kind of like introducing the audience to call and response. Just this indigenous way of resonating with people, calling attention to something very natural, like the beingness of who we are. And then from there, all of what he talked about, I felt like was honoring lived experience in the communities that we work with here in Philadelphia. And we have a lot of our folks on the call too. They're individuals with lived experience, and that isn't lived experience of like, hey, there's this trauma or injury to your person that must be made known or it makes you an expert by some means. No, it's that you're this living embodiment of evolution, of change, of transformation, where a lot of our systems in society, where their boundaries end. You know what I mean? These folks naturally pick up. And I think I said this on a previous call, our way of kind of like valuing that in some degree, where we're still at kind of like the beginnings of creating very real equity around people coming from that place and representing from that place of lived experience and its influence with systems change, community change, community development, and then also really helping people get for themselves that kind of this richness of who they are. And when the speaker shared about, hey, we wanted to know who his first educators were, his teachers were. And we went to his mother or grandmother, and they described him as a healer. And I don't know if anyone resonates with that on the call, or when you've gone into communities and you get something about people's identity that is no longer vulnerable, but it's indeed what keeps the world intact. It's indeed what makes the world possible, or their world possible, other people's worlds possible. We don't see, I think unfortunately when we go into communities, we don't see that they literally are our future. And they hold our hands through our present. And it's, again, I was just so brought to life by a lot of what he shared, because I feel like myself and the beautiful team that I work with, a lot of it is what we stand for. And we're trying to create more equity around, you know what I mean? So people can see that you're worth, well over $100, really, you couldn't quantify or even qualify people's worth. That's not indigenous, it's not native to communities. It's definitely more of a social construct. But I could go on and on, I feel, but that hopefully I answered the question. I gave some insight, but thanks again for sharing that video.
Well, Shaheed, you gave a lot of insight. One thing I want to lift up that, going from the social services model of credentialing to relationships, so the ABCD, what you mentioned when they identified him as a healer, and also the other individuals in his life that were teachers, they weren't necessarily they weren't doctors or educators and teachers in our traditional sense of credentialing, but they actually formed that function. Healer, he was a healer, although he didn't have a medical degree or a nursing degree or a nursing credential, but he was healing even with that aspect. And the people surrounding him that were his mentors, his teachers, his support, they didn't have education degrees, but they were educators. So yeah, I wanted to lift that up as well. David, you had your hand up next.
Hi, David here. This reminded me of, so maybe about 10 years ago, I was a teaching artist and I started teaching in various Chicago public schools, theater and creative writing and other arts. And at that time, it's when Rahm Emanuel's administration closed 55 schools in Chicago, mostly in Black and brown neighborhoods. And a group of other schools were turned around. So they hired this other agency or group called AUSL that then turned around the school. So basically they fired everyone in that school, including the lunch ladies, including the janitorial staff, everyone, and then brought in people, right? And I started through the organizations that I worked, they sent me to some of these schools, and I started noticing little by little that and it was mostly Black and brown schools. Most of the boys, they were kind of dwindling in numbers, right? And then I find out that they kind of push them out, right? So then I start to ask questions and to this other administrator, tell hey, what's going on with this? And they're like, yeah, they're not our problem. We're good with numbers. If we can save, or if we can, provide for this select number of folk that's of youth, that's who we're going to work for, and the rest they're not our problem. So it's all these folk that weren't from the neighborhood, right? They just got rid of that neighborhood school feel, and then brought in these outside kind of resources, outside mentality that they were just going to work for the very few students that they could work for, and the rest weren't, and the rest of the community wasn't their problem. So, and that wasn't resolved, right? That went on for years. Now AUSL is, I think it's on their last leg. They announced that they were closing down, or they were ending that contract in the next year or two. But it was so disillusioning, right? And so sad to see that, and interesting when it's just so embedded as part of the institution and celebrated like that, oh yeah, this is the solution, right? And just so wrong.
Thank you, David. Yeah, great comments. Patricia, I saw your hand up. You're muted. Go ahead and unmute. Patricia, you're still muted. We can't hear you.
I found the video very depressing. In the late 60s, I worked for SCLC on the Northern staff when King was in Chicago. And Jim Bevel would show us videos like this. And I feel like, the question of we shall overcome, and it's still going on. And we pull up images like this by the scruff of the neck and say, look, and that we're still in it. And I would like to think that he was like everybody, right? That there aren't these unusual special stories to look and lift up because they're particular. So the video for me just made me sad.
Well, thank you, Patricia. Thanks for sharing that. Yes. Yeah, it's wondering why all these years we still struggle with the same challenges over and over again. Yeah. Brad?
Yeah, I was inspired like most folks. I think I but it also was so immediately aware to me that this was a pre-COVID video, and that the things that he was talking about, the ways they were talking, we're gonna gather people up and we're gonna have a meal and we're gonna go sit down and we're gonna go talk to people and we're gonna all of those things that are so important to this kind of work, and certainly so important to us in the church and in most of our organizations. And I know at least in the church, everybody is like, we can't wait till this thing's over and we can go back to the way we were. And, it's just, it just reminded me of how important it is for us to, in all of this kind of work, to figure out how to do these things in some different ways than the ways we have been. And not just sort of wait for the ability for us all to get together for a big meal, to come back around again. That's an adaptive change that I don't think we've really actually done yet. We've sort of done the technical fixes to get us through this time, and I think we've got some real work, ground up work coming fairly soon, quite likely.
Yeah, we definitely live in different times and have different challenges, but as ABCD, we look at it as investment.
We sort of got off track because we're having a really great conversation about community resources like sidewalks and sort of like all of the different factors that go into the decision making and the funding for items like that. But something that we really hit on. So I work with the Egan office at DePaul, so we're like in the same building as the ABCD Institute at DePaul. So a lot of the work that we do is already grounded in ABCD ideas and sort of making the invisible visible. Something that I think, so I'm the program coordinator for the Urban Schools Initiative. So we send school community organizers and tutors out into the different schools in the communities to sort of, I guess support those communities, find ways to like really advocate for them, and then to work with the students that are in those schools. And I think that right now, I would say that the majority of the people that we work with would be sort of at the advisor or advocate or the information sources levels. So in Chicago, we're really fortunate that a lot of our different neighborhoods have like block clubs, and they have parental involvement groups and all of these. And so, our director really makes it a point to send our school community organizers to the meetings of those different groups so that we get a feel for what's going on in the community. We get to hear from the actual sources themselves about what's important to them, what they need, and how we can better support them, rather than just like jumping in and being like, well, you guys need better math programs. So yeah, I think that we're on a pretty good track with the programming that we do. And then as I was talking to Laura, she was talking about sidewalks in her community, that she doesn't live in an urban area, but because there are different factors sort of at play, like the historical society that maintains a certain historical charm to the community, and just funding in general, that there's a lot of bureaucracy that sort of leads to these same problems in less urban areas. And so thinking about these problems from like different perspectives, and really I lost my train of thought. I apologize. I'm on my fourth cup of coffee. But yeah, I guess just that there are different communities that are having these same issues, and kind of going from the root of the problem rather than the problem itself.
Thank you, Jennifer. That's outstanding. All right, good. All groups, excellent. Just real quickly, and I'll turn it over to Bob here. Just some of the ways we talk about social change happening. Jennifer touched on some aspects of DePaul University and how they're approaching it. We talked about this earlier on: dismantling of systems, change within systems, or creation of alternatives. All right. So I'll turn it over now to Bob.
You actually have like a break, and it's about.
We got a break? Okay.
A minute break, so it's like from.
Amos, let's just do 5 minutes, and maybe come back on the 45 or 46.
Yeah, 46. That's fine. Mm-hmm.
Okay. We're going to finish up this afternoon with a little game that one of our wonderful colleagues developed, Cormac Russell, who is, he's located in Dublin. And I use one thing that Cormac does. He did a TED Talk a couple of years back. That's one of the best summaries of ABCD. If you want to capture the whole thing in about 20 minutes and you're doing a presentation for some group and you don't have all the time that we've had over this 18 hours, you know, that you can Google Cormac's TED Talk and take a look at it. It's really, I use it quite often when I'm meeting with small groups to do a good summary. Cormac developed something called a people-powered change game, and that we're going to play in small groups. And it gets at this question of leading by stepping back in a big way. It helps us determine what citizens can do all by themselves, what citizens can do working with government and with professionals and with nonprofits, and what just institutions and nonprofits can do, you know, on their own. And the game itself, when you go into your small groups, maybe Evis or John, if we could see some of the slides that are on the thing, I can show them.
Yeah, if John, if you want to show them, I'm trying to figure something out with Miro.
Yeah. John, can you do it? Can we bring this up, the people powered change thing? In this game, I mean, there are 12 domains that change can occur in. And what we're going to do, and then there are like 100 different situations, things that can be done. And what you're going to do is that you're going to move these items to under the 3 columns that we ended up talking about. And then you're going to address, you know, you're going to do that fairly quickly, and then you're going to address a few questions at the end. And I'd like to run through those with you very quickly before you break into your small groups so that you can get a sense of what we're talking about. There we are. Okay. Next, and maybe take one more, Evis, and one more. There we go. Along the side, over here on the side, this is what you're going to see when you go into your small groups. And on the right there, you've got all the different activities, and then you can add your own too. You can write them in, and then you move them under the 3 columns. You know, so the 3 columns are things that just residents can do, what they can do with government, and then what government and professionals can do on their own. The 12 domains are health and well-being, you know, and really focusing on the whole idea that one of the healthiest things you can do is be in a number of relationships, in good, healthy relationships. The second one's on safety and security. You know, what kind of things that police presence doesn't necessarily make you safer, probably does not make you safer all by itself, that there are a lot of things that residents can do to make their communities safer. Caring for the environment, there are things that you can do in your neighborhood, in your community, and these things done successfully can really mutate into then reaching larger areas. You can nurture the local economy. How do you support entrepreneurs? How do you support your local businesses? How do you create things in your community that you can sell or trade or barter? You know, food consumption and production, taking a look at things like community gardens. If you don't have a grocery store, how do you get a grocery store in your neighborhood? Raising powerful, connected children. You know, what are you doing in your neighborhood to support to support the young people that are there. I used the example earlier about all the support that I got, playing baseball and everybody making me feel like I was important in the neighborhood. And you can do that with the young people in your neighborhood, but you can also do it with the senior citizens in your neighborhood. Aging well is number 7. So, what kind of things are you doing to support the older people in your community? Are you using all the wisdom that they've acquired over their lifetimes? Building community. Building community is like an egg hatching, that you've got all of these assets inside the community and they're hatching, and how you end up using them and engaging them, is an important thing to look at. Number 9, improving democracy and social justice. How do you support justice for the people who live in your neighborhood, live in your community? Things like Black Lives Matter came out of a neighborhood thing and then grew to a national movement, coming out of that. Responding to natural disasters. Most of the time, natural disasters cause all the institutions to actually break down. And so there really is a reliance on people in the neighborhood that help people rebuild and help people put things back together. Lifelong learning and sharing wisdom. What do people in your community know? What kind of wisdom do they have? What can they be teaching others in their community? And the last one is the big one in terms of how you change the world. And that's really the starting small in your community and building out. So we're going to break you into small groups. You're going to take a look at one, after you've moved a number of these things on the right into the 3 columns, I want you to take a look, I want you to have a discussion around how does what you're doing shift more power to associations, 1. 2, how do you shine the light on assets rather than needs when you're doing this? How do you use the resources in your community to strengthen the local economies? And what are a few practical steps you can take to help those of you that work in institutions, like churches, like nonprofit agencies, like businesses, places like that is, what practical steps can you take to help your institution start leading by stepping back? Any questions before we break? You're going to have about 20 to 25.
So first, I don't know if people were able to access this. I put in the chat some people that I know for sure that have access. So I was thinking that Alisa, Tabata, Nicole, Elizabeth, and David, and Alejandra, you definitely got in there. And you are able to, at least if other ones cannot get in, to be able to show the screen when you're in the room and manage this little post-it. So basically it's like, putting the name here of like everyone that is in the group number 1. And obviously there's going to be 6 groups. And then this is group 2, this is 3, 4, 5, 6. And some of them might have things that are slightly different in terms of post-its. You can always create more here using copy and paste, and do things that you are interested in. And then the idea again is just have just 3 questions: what residents can do by themselves, what government should do by themselves or professionals, and then what we can do together in terms of co-production, and place it in these different domains. And Bob gave you some questions. I noticed that they are not here in this board, but I can get those and put them somewhere on the right, so you can keep them in your minds as you do this exercise. Let's see if there's like any questions about at least the technological part or the.
Thank you, Evis. I wondered how we were going to get them the questions, so that's good.
Thank you.
Any questions?
We didn't finish.
Well, that's no surprise. This exercise can go on for hours.
Not enough time again.
That's been a common theme, folks. I'm sorry.
I love getting to know folks. I tell you that. Like, these exercises have been really, really rich with combo.
You're going to have all these great relationships when we're done. So
I was thinking the same thing. I almost wish we could just have ongoing groups and shuffle around and just support these in this process over
So,
a long haul
So
from afar.
Nicole, what is that on your shoulder, Nicole?
This is my cockatoo. Her name is Precious.
Wow,
She's
beautiful.
very clingy today, so I've been off camera for most of it, but camera on for the small group. So
Yeah,
yeah.
cool. So we
Well,
have
your cockatoo should meet Elizabeth's cat.
we have a cockatoo.
Oh
I have a
yeah.
cat.
Precious.
This is Nobody Owens.
Yeah,
Nobody owns.
great. All right, folks. So let's do group number one. And is there a way you can bring that down? If someone's going to speak for group number one in terms of what you did in moving things.
I can go ahead and speak for group number one, but
All right.
Jonathan and Jennifer, you can definitely speak if I'm missing anything. So we just kind of started at the top, of those 12 factors and then just kind of worked our way down. We didn't get to everything because we started brainstorming ideas like for responding to natural disasters. Like we took the few that were from the side and then we started brainstorming some of our own to kind of fill those gaps.
Yep.
But as time went on, we just realized that like these all are interconnected, right? Like, for example, like farmers markets and CSAs and community gardens are both like nurturing the local economy as well as caring for the environment and building community. So they're just like all interconnected together. And, knowing your neighbor's first name is good for health and well-being and safety, as well as building community. And we just noticed that, there's actually a lot that residents can do for themselves. And or be kind of that initial catalyst and then work with institutions or professionals or government if need be to help advance the cause. Like, for example, we talked about like park stewardship or like adopt a park program, like that could start informally as a group of residents. But if that's a service that they want to make more broadly, they could work with the local government to legitimize it a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of going back and forth, and we just kept on brainstorming more ideas around all of these topics and things like that. So group one, anything else?
I
would just say that I brought this up when we were talking, that a lot of these things like residents can do, and I don't know if that was the goal of this exercise, but a lot of ours like lean toward the residents with maybe some government or professional help. And there's like, if you can see how it's organized, there's less as it only the government can do. So it's like really shines a light on, what we can do together as residents with a little bit of help. So I thought that was very good to know.
Jonathan, that's really the purpose of it, is to get you, when you list all of these things, and oftentimes institutions are doing all this stuff and residents can handle this stuff. So it's really to change people's mindset in terms of how we get people to help themselves, so. All right. So group number two. Okay, do we have a spokesperson?
Yeah, I can hop in for group two.
Right.
Yeah, so actually, yeah. So yeah, we had I guess a similar experience as what was just expressed, right? We had it was a very thin line for sort of government professionals, and mostly just like, please maintain the walkways and public spaces with lighting, waste management, recycling, and and really some consultation or engagement with residents around solutions that they want. There is some role for government and professionals to work with residents around sort of this COVID-19 clinic, filling potholes. And then we had a lot of things. Well, yeah, we had most of our spaces with sort of residents themselves, and then some stuff that was kind of in that white space between residents doing themselves and then working with professionals. And but in terms of what residents would be doing, community fruit harvesting, restorative justice circles, collective vegetable growing, and with something like that, gardening or growing, there was also this discussion around how in Chicago specifically, water is a really difficult thing for community gardens to access. So that's where you might actually need sort of government engagement to like turn on the water, please. But yeah, block parties. And we were having trouble with the sort of categorization on the left, in that, yeah, there are things that have sort of overlap between multiple different areas, I mean, between sort of safety and security, community well-being, building community. Something like a block party could definitely be raising powerful, connected children, but it also could just be general community building. It also is a health and well-being dynamic. And, I mean, I think joy and play is its own right, so therefore, like block parties have multiple functions. We talked a little bit about, grassroots media outlets and public documentation, things that could potentially improve democracy, increase social justice, but also it's just sort of generally informing the community about what is happening. So we had a very generative discussion, and I think we mostly agreed that this was a fun game that many of us are going to steal.
Yeah. And Jonathan, the overlapping and stuff like that is on purpose. I mean, that no one item, I mean, they all interact with each other to some degree. So that's not an accident that you were struggling with that. So how about group number 3?
So we tried our best. We were, we had a bit of a learning curve. Let's see. Oh, hold on. I wanted to look at the discussion questions. Where did we go? I think here. Oh, yeah.
Save the discussion questions for the next phase. We're just doing the chart now.
Okay, got it.
Okay.
So we were just kind of going from the like the top of the action cards and just sorting them into the different categories. We found that like there's so much that residents can do by themselves, especially in partnerships with professionals and organizations. And so, that's very empowering to see. Does anyone else want to chime in? I know Erin.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, sorry, I'm thinking on my own. I went down the categories and identified first senior citizen organizations or groupings and what they're doing in every one of those categories in Chicago. And then I went through, I didn't finish, but I went through thinking of all the youth organizations and what they are specifically doing in any one of those categories. And we could think about other populations, but for those two at least, older adults and youth, there is activities in every one of those categories going on in Chicago now.
Good. Thank you, Patricia. All right. Group number, I've lost track, 4. Nice colors. Okay, who's reporting for group 4?
I'll go ahead and start.
All right.
So sorry, I don't have my glasses on. So yeah, kind of like with everybody else's groups, there were a lot of overlap, and we talked a bit about just the idea of encouraging people to do things for themselves rather than like having things done to them or for them. One thing we discussed a little bit was the friendly, connected local police was actually, I guess we had 2 of them as one of our like little topics. And I brought up that, to like, you can have individuals and stuff, but to like a certain extent, there needs to be like policies and like structural changes in order to change like behaviors of like individual forces and stuff.
Right, right.
I don't know if anyone else wants to add on to that.
we spent a lot of time noticing how things were lining up, and as well as learning how to use this app. It's cute though. And and we just, like everyone else, noticed that it's funny how that last column has like almost nothing. And but we also talked about the importance of remembering to do no harm, in the sense of ABCD being a process of helping neighbors and communities to help themselves, while at the same time, for me anyway, my thing is, if you're a taxpayer, you need to understand how to have local and state government work for you. There are certain things that in some communities, for example, they may not be aware of, that they, the right-of-way area, where the lights are, the street lights, if those go out, you need to report it and have them turned back on. You cannot do that yourself. You have to call the local government to have them do that. So if you have a whole street or two with no street lights, or they stopped working, then you must understand that that needs to be taken care of by government or whomever is responsible for that thing, and have it done.
Good, good. All right. Group number 5.
Oh. Well, we had a bit of difficulty navigating the the platform. So the first half of it was figuring out how to operate the platform. And at several points, we felt like certain cards had disappeared, or so. But I think the general impression was that things tended towards the left-hand side of the screen, where residents could only do it, and or residents in cooperation with public figures. There was very little, I think, that was on that far right-hand side of the screen, where only government could do it. So it really illustrated that point. I think that issues are better left solved by communities rather than by outside top-down government sort of thing.
Yeah,
So
definitely the primary lesson there, David.
Yeah.
Yep. All right. Group number 6.
Oh, yeah, that's us.
All right. Alejandra?
Thank you, Alejandra. Are you gonna explain this for us? We're all having internet difficulties today, our whole group, I think, and had quite a bit of a learning curve on using Miro, but yeah, we had a lot of really great conversations and discussions about different components here. Feel free to pop in, Alejandro or Shahid, if you have something to say.
Well, it appears that your example is much like the others, with everything moving toward the left side of the diagram, and not a lot there for just institutions to do. Any other comments?
Well, I heard some of what you said, and then my internet cut out, but yes, to the left, it took me a while to see that we were, anyway, it was really an interesting activity, and it's a neat platform.
Yeah.
It just went away. It was up in front of me, and now it's not. So one thing Oh. Well, yeah, and I've appreciated everybody's observations, and we added a few in. We figured out how, or one of us figured out how to add new squares, and so we added some components. But really, we spent a long time trying to learn the platform.
And we figured out that it's easier to use on an iPad instead of a of a MacBook.
Interesting. Okay. Well, let's spend a few minutes on the questions themselves. I don't know how many of you got to the questions, but did you, any group that would like to jump in to just start talking about the questions about how do you start this discussion about, practical steps you can take to help your institution lead by stepping back? I mean, since you see all the, go ahead, Gigi.
Hi. In group 4, we did talk about the question about creating a budget for local economies.
Okay.
Was that one of the questions?
Yes.
And we had a discussion about that because we had a couple of church organizations. In fact, someone said, well, only mega churches have that kind of money. And so they quickly informed us that small churches have no money to give to any, to do anything, but they do contribute time, space, various things that are needed in their small church communities. And I think that's how we ended up also talking about the police. And anyone else want to chime in from group 4, Elizabeth or Chanel or Matt? Anything else about those questions that you recall?
I think in part of the discussion mentioned that, institutions and things like that, they are, everybody, I think every place has a limit as to how much or what they can do. But the important thing that I'm taking away from all of this is, as a practitioner, to engage the community to see the ABC way of things and let them know that, they can, every place has to start somewhere in their community. So just making them aware of different things that, you're able to take control. You're able to help your community. You're able to do your part. And if people are doing their part, whatever it is that they decide they want to do in their community to start working on that it's a collaborative. So maybe not one institution by itself bears the burden or provides the resource, but what can you contribute as a community, as people, to work it together becomes sufficient, or whatever it is that your goal is to do. As each community might be a little different and may have a different need, but I think kind of letting them see this ABC model is a great way to introduce them to ways to improve their communities.
Chanel, a great first step, Chanel, is getting people out of the mindset of people are going to do things for us, as opposed to we're going to do things for ourselves, to start the process going. Okay. Anybody, any other groups who addressed the questions and talked about them?
Something that we kind of came across, which I thought was really interesting, was this idea that you have to take into account the histories of the communities that you're working in and how they've interacted with people from the outside in the past. And there have been plenty of communities that have been exploited for research purposes or exploited for people who work for institutions that want to make money through the programs that they work for. And so you have to kind of take into account those histories and really, I guess, work to be a listener rather than a doer, and rather than a imposer of ideas on the community. So attending those meetings of like local institutions, not saying anything while you're there, just listening and like really getting a feel for how the community really operates.
Thanks, Jennifer. Okay, anybody with a last comment before we turn it over to Evis to close us out? Go ahead, Amber.
Well, I'm curious if the group would be interested in hearing a particular scenario that sort of speaks to these questions. I'd be curious about feedback. I don't know if that's appropriate now use of time or what, but what do you think? Are you open to a little scenario?
Evis, all set?
I think that's fine. Yeah, because you can close.
Yeah, go ahead, Amber.
Okay. Well, I'm amazed at how rich my community is in assets. And as a community member, I was looking for more opportunities for school, and I found a really neat charter school that's sort of virtual home-based hybrid, and they operate across the whole state. And I begged them to come to our community and hosted a meeting, and 40 people came to our first meeting, and it's been a couple years, and people have stuck with it and said they wanted it. And 2 years later, I asked the school, I said, hey, I've been doing all this community outreach and coordinating on a volunteer basis, and it's great. And I'm so glad you're here. You've opened a class here. Is there any way you could hire me? Because I'm everybody's point person, and it's taking up so much time and energy, and it's ready for, full-time attention. And they did. So now I started as a community member, but now I am hired by the institution to do community development so that our community can say what it is we want and what capacity we want that school to serve us. And so I am trying to navigate that spot between, and fortunately, the school and the institution I work for is very familiar with ABCD. And they're definitely following that protocol and paying me to do this work. And I reiterate every time I speak with community members that, first and foremost, I live here, I'm your neighbor, I'm a community member, and we have this opportunity. And what do we want, this presence to look like, and how can we make partnerships? And anyway, but this whole idea of institutions stepping back, I'm just curious about feedback on that scenario where I'm like in this weird gray area between starting as a very grassroots community organizer, but now essentially I'm funded to do the work, which is an immense blessing for me. But it does sort of shift my position.
Yeah. Any thoughts on Amber's thing? I've got some thoughts, but let me open it up to the group. And think in terms of leading by stepping back.
I can offer some feedback because I have a similar situation at one of the spaces I work called Open Collective Foundation, which is a fiscal sponsor, mostly at this point for mutual aid groups that arose during the 2020 mutual aid uprising. And so, one of the things that we value as a fiscal sponsor is that we don't do any program management. So effectively, all of these mutual aid groups that want to figure out ways to aid their community, all we provide is like this back-end infrastructure for administration, accounting, and legal and compliance support. And that effectively moves a lot of autonomy to the groups to like do things within the realm of compliance. Like, and we're basically there to provide a set of guardrails and then just like never, do nothing in terms of like directing what program happens. So to the extent that, this charter school has employed you, because I basically got employed because I had a project hosted with Open Collective. And then they said, you're connected to this ecosystem. We want you to be in here to build these conversations. To the extent that the charter school is actually leaning into this ethic of saying like, hey, how can we actually have the community design, direct, and declare sort of what this school will be. That, I mean, maybe that's a really important sort of notion of, that's an important part of self-determination for me. Like the full design is in the hands of community.
Jonathan, I would love for you to come to our community and teach them real collective impact work, because you're demonstrating it in a way that a lot of the collective impact projects have been institutionally led, as opposed to what you're doing.
That's Mike, not Jonathan, by the way.
Thank you, Mike.
Right.
So and my other challenge is, how can I?
Oh, yeah, that's Mike. Excuse me.
So, Mike, you're in essentially the same place. Have you found that has affected how you're perceived by your people within these projects? Does I mean, I've noticed it whenever my small group expands again and again, and it's starting to mushroom right now. Somebody says, oh, my friend wants to talk to you. And this is someone I've never met in the community. And so I talk to them. And at that point, I'm introduced as she works for this school, right? So then I have to what I do is I try to backtrack in that learning conversation and explain, hey, I'm a mom, and, I started right where you are, just looking for other options. And this has shown up and it's been great. And now we have this opportunity, which leads me to that challenge where I don't know how to get everyone in the same place at the same time. I don't know how to, internet is a major issue where I live. Not everybody has the ability or the desire, where I live especially, to use online tools. And, there isn't like a real good singular location where everyone can be present at once. So anyhow, that power dynamic is that perceived power dynamic.
Amber, can I ask you a quick question?
Yeah.
I know it sounds like you're still figuring out your role. Do you know if the school that you work for is eventually going to tap these relationships to help them influence decisions as a school?
Well, they have reiterated over and over again that they only want to provide what the community wants. That they're here by invitation, and how can we support you? What matters to your community? And our director has trained in asset-based community development. So, it's familiar. So there is that. And we are hoping to do things in partnership with other organizations.
Okay. The only thing that I was going to add is I was basically a community organizer for a city. And, so much of my job was bringing the community and the residents to help inform and influence decisions by our elected officials, by our city council members, by our mayor. And unfortunately, like people in decision making, like if they don't want to listen to the community, like you can only do as good of community organizing or community engagement as the decision makers are allowed. Like decision makers will actually listen to the community. So that would be like my one word of advice is like really make sure that if you're working with community to influence your decisions, that it's a transparent process and that the community doesn't feel like used or manipulated. So just to be mindful of that as you're doing an organizing role for an institution. That's where I often felt this tug of, I'm trying to make sure that the voices of the communities are being heard, but the decision makers, there's a gap there. So that would be my one word of advice is
absolutely
that it's a fine balancing act on that tightrope. So hopefully that was helpful.
Well, at least I don't feel alone in this overlap space, Mike and Alyssa both. I appreciate that. I'm curious what tools you've used to create that transparency. And fortunately, the leaders in the institution are they want the community input. Like they don't want to do anything without it. And so I'm blessed in that regard. They're incredibly responsive. And, sorry.
Well, that's okay. So let's, we've just got a couple minutes. John
Yeah,
and Evis is not going to be with us next week, but John and I are going to do an open space discussion next week when we want to do things exactly what you've led off here, Amber. And I think the feedback has been terrific, and I hope this would be helpful to all of you. And be thinking during the week about issues like this, because we're going to take time to have the discussion next week.
well, actually, like in the second question of the Google Slides, which is like which recommendations do you have for last time together? If you can put any specific topics there, I think that will help us, because again, as Bob said, we're gonna have like at least like 1 hour of like some kind of like open space when people can bring things like this. But if we have a little bit of guidance in advance, I think that will help us a lot to get a sense of the room, right? And the idea is that you could also move on from room to room and listen to different conversations. So something of that sort. So obviously we don't have time to look at what are some of those recommendations, and also what stood out to you as like important, as something that we should remember. But just like look at those like last slides and add there your thoughts. We will definitely look at them. And then we also want to thank Jonathan for compiling some ABCD community resources and links and things that we have been sharing. I will also add that to our Google Drive. And the last thing I wanted to say is that, well, I'm not going to see you next time. So it has been a pleasure to share with you. And also like Bob and John and myself are able to meet with you if you would like to do something, just kind of like schedule a call. So we're available to, again, just be resources to you outside of this workshop. And actually the last thing I want to say is that today is like Bob's 77th birthday. So he's going to
Happy birthday
rating and he already has balloons and everything. So again, I don't know if one of like people's skills is to sing, but I don't know.
Happy birthday to you.
Oh God.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Bob. Happy birthday to you.
And many more.
Don't you just love singing on Zoom? You know, it's so together.
All right. Well, thank you all, and see you next time.
Yes. Thanks. Thanks, everybody. Great day today. We'll see you next Saturday.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Ciao,
everyone.
Ciao.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Bye.
Hi.
Hi.
My internet's been cutting out so bad. You said that you don't mind scheduling a little session later at some point.
Yeah,
Is
yeah.
that?
Yeah,
We'd be happy to.
Thank you. Okay, that'd be great.
All right. Well, great.
Amber, that was a great example for you to lay out there for us. I mean, I think that it's exactly those kind of very practical on the ground situations that I think a lot of people like yourself get into. So
Yep. Well, and
yep.
I've recently been I just did the asset mapping exercise, and I made this huge Google sheet or doc with just listing. I went through my paper notes and started just writing everybody. And then I shared that with my team that I now work for, my institutional team. And it brought up this question. And I had to, when I shared it with them, I made them, I'm also on a learning curve with this remote work environment, I think a lot of us have a lot of, have that right now with COVID, and but this is more of a remote organization anyway. But I shared it with them and said, please, 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 like, be really considerate with this information. And if you want to talk to anybody or relay what's on this list, like, talk to me first so I can make the connections in an organic way. And that brought up the question of privacy. Like, when I have these learning conversations, I don't tell people I'm taking notes, and I'm sharing them with my team. Your name is there and what your skills and gifts are. Like, so yeah, it's such a big project because it's a really, it's a rural region. It's a large area with so many organizations, institutions, associations.
Right.
And how to build that transparency in it's a big concern.
Yeah, I had a thought because I do this, but obviously it's kind of like as a researcher trying to look also for opportunities. But something I do is tell people that I'm doing an asset map and that I like to interview them, which means like it's just having a conversation, talk to them. And the same thing with institutions. So it's just like, okay, there's these like groups that are doing something. So I like to learn, what are you doing? What are your assets? What you can offer? And then I just like type that out, and they know that I'm typing it out because we're having the conversation. And the idea is that later you can have like a report that shows, these are some of the assets that people spoke about. And the idea is like how we mobilize these assets, and I will send it to them or think about any other ideas. But I don't know if in your case you could do something like that. It takes a lot of energy.
You're saying, well, I mean, that's exactly what I've been doing, but you tell the people I'm making an asset map.
Asset map. Yeah. And then I write more about it. Like, these are the things that you said, and share it with everyone.
That's usually, I do that in a follow-up email, oh, thanks for talking to me today. But that's great to reiterate the main points of the conversation as well. And then, yeah, because I'm wondering, at some point, if I wanted to share this asset map with the community, maybe they don't want their name and their gifts on this shared document that's available to whomever jumps in, and
that's a permission. That's a permission thing, Amber, before you put their names up. But a lot of people will give you permission to do that.
All right. So now that I'm so far, I mean, I've got more than 50 people, on entities on my map. I should go back and ask everyone individually about adding them to my asset map, which I may share in the future.
Or you can send out one mass email and just have them respond to you.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, if it's okay. And a lot of people will say yes.
Yes, most of them will say yes.
After that, yeah.
Okay.
Or the other thing, yeah. Well, sure. Because in research, again, it's different. I might say link someone to an association if they don't want to use their name, but the vast majority of people do want to use their names.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks for some direction on that.
Well, it's funny, Amber, when I ask people to share their assets, I put one big caveat on it. An asset isn't an asset unless you're willing to share it. So they give permission right on the front end that if they put their asset up, they're willing to share it with people.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, I've been doing this just organically for over 2 years now. So, like, my role has changed just recently. So I suppose, I like the idea of doing a group email and just sort of explaining the situation. And I can also ask for ideas on how to reach everybody. And
and the other thing is that
that's great.
This becomes like great resources for other people trying to organize, right? So
yes,
that's kind of part of it. If you can say, I will have a meeting, I have been doing this, and I like to hear what are your thoughts about it. And then just like say, how we can also use it together. Because like the part of the idea is that you are not the only one that has, the secret list, right?
Yeah, I know. Like once I wrote it down, it brought that up for me. It was like, oh my gosh. And then I shared it with my institution and I told them, keep it secret because I didn't get clear permissions yet. So that's a huge thing I need to address. So thank you. That's definitely, maybe yeah, that's I think that everybody is going to be faced with this at some point, if they're doing this process, is
Yes.
Yeah.
that privacy shared permissions component. And while you're all here, can I just do this little consult now and pick your brain on something? I know we've been here all day, and if you got to go, I understand.
I think Bob needs to go because he's.
Yeah,
And it's your birthday.
I have a birthday party. So I've got about 3 minutes.
Okay. Okay.
Okay.
Well, have a happy birthday.
I am having a happy birthday. You guys contributed to that. So that was great.
That was great.
Yeah. But yeah, John and I could stay.
All righty. Have a great one, you guys.
Thank you.
Amber,
Bye.
thanks for bringing this up with us.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for being there.
Hey, it's what we do. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
All right. So I've already explained the scenario, I think, pretty clearly. In November, I have 3, I hate to use the word boss because I ran my own business for 10 years prior to this. But anyway, I like to say my team, but the directors of the school, there are 3 main directors, and the man I work most closely with, Bill, 2 of them are absolute visionaries, and Bill is the yes man. Absolutely. And the other 2 are a little more cautious. So anyway, I think Bill was getting a little pressure, and keep in mind, this is a remote work environment. We don't see each other in person. We're spread out all over the state of Oregon. So at some point, I think the other 2 guys were saying, what do you have this lady down here doing? What is happening? Why are we paying this woman? What's going on? So I started getting some emails saying, are you sure this is, the community wants us, or what's happening? It's like rolling a boulder up a hill. And so I facilitated a meeting with an organization that I had kind of kept in my back pocket, so to speak. So one of the things that the school expressed a need or an interest was, all right, so things are growing. We want to know what the community wants. We know that the families want a place. They want to see each other. They want to interact. They want to build their school community. They want opportunities for their kids. So maybe we should think about getting a campus or renting a place. And we could absolutely contribute and partner with organizations. Yes, we could work with others and build a full-on community center makerspace that would be available to the entire community, not just our students. Yes, yes, yes. So I pulled together this meeting with, there's an organization so our valley is long and wide, shaped like a crescent moon. And there's a piece of land that's set aside for public use. They have a few facilities, they have trails. It's a beautiful piece of land, but it's on one end of the valley, and it has a long-standing reputation for being somewhat dysfunctional and insular, sort of by and for this one little neighborhood region. And so when they came to me over the last 2 years, I said, oh yes, like our focus on place-based, hands-on education, outdoor ed, yes, that's all aligned. That's great. But I'll keep it in mind. I think we really need to hear from everybody, and I'm going to hold off until we do, until everybody speaks up. I think we should, focus on opportunities that are more centrally located, so it's accessible to everybody and not way off the beaten path where this organization is. So I kind of tried to keep them in my back pocket because I was wary of their reputation, and their location is really clearly beneficial to one side of the valley. And I hadn't even been there in the 10 years I've lived where I live because they're just sort of so far out there. But some people who live over there use it all the time. So that's the context of that organization. And so when I got that email saying what's going on, I decided to pull that up. And I had also recently become aware of this idea that, maybe instead of one campus makers community center in the middle of the valley, maybe we could have one on either end, and then a shuttle that runs between, because now we're stacking functions because people need to get around as well. And that would help so many more people. So I expanded my perspective and thought, all right, it would make a lot of sense if we did explore that partnership. Why reinvent the wheel? They already have the land and the facilities, and we both want more education. They are a nonprofit that has been funded by pretty much one donor for the last 22 years, who's getting upward in age and really wants a sustainable income. So that's one of their needs. My organization can offer that. So we had this big meeting, and everybody was really excited about this possible partnership. I invited other people who've been, organizational leaders that have been talking with me for the last couple of years. And so, and my boss told me he hasn't been this excited in years. It was such a great alignment and, a match of our various gaps. We need a location. They need a solid, functional entity that can fund them and really make their program work, because their board member described it as them being an 8-headed hydra, but they really need to be an octopus. A 1 head, 8 legs, right? So we had this big meeting, and then all of a sudden, after the meeting, and the team flew in. It was a big ordeal. The brand new executive director, who's brand new to our community, he's only lived here for 6 months. He's only worked for the nonprofit for a few months. I would describe him as a slick marketer. After this big meeting, he decided that maybe their nonprofit should just start their own charter school modeled exactly after ours, and decided that they weren't really interested in partnering, that they just want to build their own charter school. And so, yeah, it felt really, and Teach Northwest, or my charter school organization, I feel a sense of loyalty to them. They've been very generous. They really are in my community because we have begged and demanded of them to come be here. And but I know that land, that 22-year-old nonprofit, also holds a very special place in our community. And fortunately, and I think the right approach is that my school, we don't want to be perceived as engaging in any kind of a battle with them. We want to continue supporting them and working together. Their location and their current offerings are one of our vendors that our students can take classes there. We have a partnership in that capacity. So, but it's just a really, I'm trying to contend and I don't know how to handle the fallout, or like their brand new director, brand new community member is framing things. I think he's trying to pit. There were a lot of red flags when we had the meetings, and I think that he is like, I think he's kind of a player of people, and he used the word competition like 3 times in my second conversation with him. And I even said to him, hey, David, this, I've heard you say competition, and I just want you to know that our community has so much to offer. And, we've done it by collaborating, and, competition's almost a bad word here in this Valley. Like, just so like, we can do this together, we can be stronger together. So I just, it's a really sensitive thing. The rumor is getting out that, oh, this organization might be starting their own charter school. And, and so now as I engage with people, I have to be so diplomatic and careful about maybe not telling this story. Am I making any sense? I know this has gotten really long. I apologize.
Yeah, well, I don't have like any, examples really from my own community work. But it seems like what you're saying is that, again, there's someone new that I wasn't part of these previous conversations, right? So I don't know if he had the opportunity to really listen to those conversations. So I don't know. So maybe there's a little bit, I don't know if there's somebody inside of their nonprofit that could relate to this person, like what were some of those conversations, right, about partnership? Because it can be that, again, he just has his own ideas, but he might not be too aware of like the ideas of the community. Presumably. Another thing is that maybe he doesn't value them. That's a different thing.
I suspect, right? I suspect that that's where it's at. I mean, like I said, the red flags have pointed me to, I don't want to believe that that's even possible, but unfortunately, evidence kind of points me that way. And I have been, I have a really great connection. Their educational director actually is a part of our school and has been involved from the beginning with the school that I brought. Her kids attend it now. She actually said that she's so disgusted by him doing this, and that it's really sad, and she really wants there to still be a partnership with our organizations because it really makes a lot of sense. But she said she actually applied to work at our school after this. So I guess I'm just really trying to stay positive and hope that together, I think that the story that I have to tell and the face that I have to put on is that I just really hope we can all focus on, partnering our unique strengths in a way that we can work together to provide all this amazing educational opportunities for our kids. And I don't, should I never address like, this, I mean, should I never say, oh, they're trying to steal our thunder or co-opt what we've been working for? I mean, I shouldn't say that even.
Amber, if I could, I do have some experience in this area.
I bet, please.
So here's what I would recommend. The message that you said earlier, that this is an opportunity to provide, resources and opportunity for our children, and that's your whole goal. So let's look at it from an asset-based community development mindset.
Thank you.
Okay. So the mindset that we're caught up in right here is it's a finite. It's either one will have a charter school or the other one will have a charter school. It's an or. And the asset-based community development mindset is abundance, right? So it's an and. So if you want a charter school, that's great. We got a charter school, that's great. That just means it's more opportunities and more choices for our students, our children in this community. I mean, first there was no charter school. Now we got potentially multiple charter schools. Okay. And I would approach that aspect. And if they don't want to partner and they want to go on their own, that's their business. And I would say you leave the door open, but I wouldn't obsess on it anymore. If you're looking for land, there's other opportunities to get land. Okay. Yeah. So when you do your asset mapping, figure out who has land. So I'm thinking off the top of my head, I don't know your community, but I imagine it's rural like West Virginia. You got parks and recreation. You got a lot of land there. You got farmland preservation. You got you got folks that may be senior centers. I don't know if you got senior centers there. Other schools. Now, public schools, they got they have opportunities for. Now, I don't know if they're going to.
And I have lots of other positive relationships in those areas and leads there. The other schools, yes.
Okay, so they may or may not, because there's a tension between public schools and charter schools and all that kind of stuff, because they see themselves as competition. But you're part of a charter school that has a track record of knowing what a charter school is and providing those types of services. You tried to partner with an organization that has the land, but not the charter school, right? Now they think they can become a charter school. That's their issue, but you're looking for land. Okay. That's just what I understand, what I'm getting from you. So
yeah,
I would leave the door open to them and say, look, we'd love to partner with you, but move on. And if they do set up a charter school, so what? They're going to have a heck of a learning curve in trying to develop a charter school model from their past than you all. To me, if I were you, I would much rather be worried about, I would much rather be in the position of knowing what a charter school is, my expertise, and already done it, and look for land, because land is more available than the knowledge of setting up a charter school. So they're going to have a huge investment in trying to figure that realm out. When there's a lot, land is all over the place. It's just to figure out who's willing to partner with you that may not see themselves as competition, but a enhancement. So I'm thinking of Parks and Rec. They're in athletic aspects. They have facilities. They would love to have an educational component. I would think of like an after-school program for youth. Of course, during school, their facilities are probably not being utilized as much, because it's more after school and summers and stuff like that. If there could be some type of connection where you can provide an educational, learning, enrichment component to their athletics and recreational stuff, and they can provide the land and all for the time when they're not utilizing the land, that's a win-win. And they don't see competition.
Yet, that's a great idea, and I should reach out. We do not have a Parks and Rec presence in our valley, period. They are in town, and their programs fill up like crazy. So I don't know if they have an outreach or they're considering expanding to any of the rural communities, but that's
keep in mind, don't
know without asking.
Yeah, don't limit what they already have.
Right. No, I get, yeah, that's
these
great.
folks know they're all about land, and maybe they don't own it, but they know someone that they can partner with to help you in the valley to get it, because maybe they were thinking about getting in the valley, but they never really had a reason to go into the valley. You come along and say, hey, here's this opportunity, could this be something we could work together? And I bet you somebody, asset-based community development, someone on their board probably says, you know what, I know so-and-so in the valley that has this space, that this would be a mutually beneficial advantage, or mutually beneficial to both of us to approach this person and see if they would like to join us, Parks and Rec, charter school, so you start to building a coalition. The more people you got in, the better off you're going to be. And that other entity, they're going to be by themselves because they just want to do it all themselves. And that's fine. That's just not an asset-based community development model, right? You're more inclusive. You want to get more and more people to the table. It's mutually beneficial to everybody to come. If they're of,
There's
we
so
want to
many
do it
of
ourselves, they're going to
many-
isolate themselves and not be as effective.
Right. And yes, and I believe that's the right track. And a lot of the people that really utilize that organization's land already and their programs, it's a big part of their lives. They've expressed to me, that, I mean, there are people who care about both things, and this strange this approach that they're taking is almost creating a like a choice. And I agree. My organization and I need to learn how to like really project what you said. I mean, my organization, our leaders have already said it, like, yes, there's room for more. If they want to do it, that's their choice. And, there's abundance, and we'll still work with them. And, we can maybe have partnerships. There's just all these people now in the middle that want to see a partnership because it makes so much sense. So I guess.
So not to cut you off, but so the messaging to individuals, behavior science shows, okay, behavioral economics, behavioral science, that if you propose someone, if one party says, hey, I want to work together, I want to be inclusive, I want to, equality, equity, we're all about inclusiveness, let's all work together in partnership. And the other party says, no, you either choose them or me. 9 times out of 10, people will go with the other party. If you're saying, if you force someone to make a choice, it's either me or them, okay, that sends a signal saying, okay, forget it, I'm going with them. And the idea there is, ultimately, what probably will happen is once you develop a coalition of different groups, the more the merrier, the more the diverse, most likely this other entity is going to see a bandwagon and they're going to say, we better jump on this or we're going to get run over. And they will join, because ultimately they say, well, we thought we'd go on our own, but we decided otherwise, we'd like to join you. And you say, hey, come on board, that's great. It may take them a little longer.
Okay, yeah.
But I wouldn't spend any more time with them, except to say the door is always open. We would love to partner with you. And I would spend all my rest of my time in developing coalitions with other groups to acquire the resources necessary in order to build your program. Don't spend any more, one more minute. You're wasting your time and leaving the door open for them to come forward and say, Amber, we thought about it. Initially, we weren't sure about it, but we'd like to join you now. Let them make the next move. You've already reached out to them. You've already talked to them about it. And so all the convincing in the world's not going to change their mind at this point. What's going to change it? You got to change the wins. And what I mean by that, there's an example of this. Jim Wallace said that, we spend a lot of time trying to change policymakers' minds. Okay. And they do what they want. We then try to spend a lot of time trying to change the policymakers so they do what they want. He says, but the policymakers or elected officials are this. They're individuals in suits. They come out, they have their finger in the air, testing the winds. Okay. And if this guy's what you say is, he's a marketer and he's looking for the wins, they're testing the wins. And you got those policymakers that want to do the right thing no matter what. You got those who'll do the right thing if they have the wind to their back, and those who just want to succeed. Okay. And if you, instead of changing their minds or changing the policymakers, like thinking this guy's going to be replaced, what you need to do is focus on changing the winds. Because if you change the winds, they will all come. All of them.
Thank
and
you.
The same thing with them. You change the winds in your community, even though they love them and they love you all. The more that are if you develop a coalition of more people than them, people are going to ask that love them, why aren't you joining? Why don't you join this other group? What's going on? Why don't you join this coalition? And their own people are going to start questioning them and their motivations.
That's
and
already
once that occurs. Has it already
been happening?
Yeah. So I'd say the wind's starting to change, and your goal is to develop a coalition as many people as possible.
So I need to get myself out of the way and not be all frustrated and bummed out that.
Not at all. It's a great opportunity. It's a great opportunity for you to go out and get other people, because if you did get them, what would happen, you'd have a duality, and you probably wouldn't invite anybody else to the table, right? You got your land, they got their education. Hey, we got a great partnership. We're married. We don't need anybody else. But this opened your eyes of looking at multiple aspects.
Yeah. And well, when we had the meeting, so I've been working on this 2 years, and I had I brought the libraries. I have a great connection with the library system. They came. I have a great connection with a local brick and mortar elementary school. The woman was sick and couldn't make it, but she's been supportive of my school from the beginning. We have another community organization. I've got a lot of people. So what does a coalition look like? Is that something I can do officially? Because right now it's just this big amorphous network. I have a lot of people on board with this effort already, and they were all invited to that one meeting. Because like you said, I don't want it to just be us two. The more partnerships, the better,
well, Amber,
in my opinion.
Out of the 6 assets, that those individuals that you brought together, what would we call that? Which asset is it? You took individuals, right? Or individual organizations,
yes,
you brought them to the table. What is that called?
I don't understand.
Asset number 2.
Asset number 2? What do you mean?
Association.
Oh, association.
You have developed an association.
So a coalition and
association. You brought these individuals together to discuss these opportunities, and you have a group of association. You have an association of associations. Okay. And what you do is you say, okay, how can we work together? And the libraries say, well, we got classroom space. Okay, where are you located? I'm located here. The other group school says, well, we're located over in this community. We got classroom available. Okay, there's some more land. And then all of a sudden you can say, okay, how can we deliver this? What would be a good model that we utilize all these assets to link and connect the network to deliver these types of educational opportunities for our children and our youth? And then have them come up with some ideas.
Would you think then that, like, as a way, so I have this asset map where I have all these things listed out. Would you think that another group email, one for the permission piece, but would you think another group email kind of inviting everybody to at least a Zoom meeting or another in-person meeting for the official purpose of going over this asset map? So first I do the permissions thing, and then I would come back to the people on the asset map and ask them, do you want to, you've been such a big part of talking with me and bringing this school to the area. Like, we've gotten this far and your input was so valuable. I'd like to have a meeting with all of us that have informed this over the last couple of years. Would you come to this, and then name it and have them come to a meeting?
That's one way.
That sounds great. Yeah. That's
Yeah,
a
I mean,
good strategy.
your
And then,
strategy, go ahead, Evis.
yeah, and then see like what people are interested in doing, right? Because it might be that let's say that people are interested in, and they can make a list of like not only what they will do with the list, but which issues they want to work in together. And that could be anything, right? So I have some coalitions that, for example, are all about learning from each other. So you can have conversations of like, what is this organization doing? What is this one doing? What this one doing? And then thinking about, ways to connect. I have other organizations that is like about learning from outsiders. So it might be inviting someone that is like a specialist on like, how to work with like kids with disabilities in schools, right? So it could transform itself into something like that, or it could be something like, we are going to work on I don't know, something after school programs, how we can connect kids, and we're going to put grants together. So anything could happen, but it's just a matter of like what they're interested in doing, right? And working, and you can set it up so it's like a lead swim meet. Also, this might be a question for them. If it's actually a coalition, would you like to meet like, every bi-monthly, and then at least, I think that usually it's better just to start small and then see what is the interest and who keeps showing up to build an actual coalition. Because like a coalition is usually people that meet over a long period of time, right? But you can start with something small, like we will meet, this first time, and then from there maybe 2 more times, and keep it small, but then see in what it might evolve. Because again, like the starting of coalitions, sometimes you have something in your head, and I have started many coalitions and it ends up doing something completely different, just, based on like who actually shows up, what people are, what are their interests, right? And what is the niche that, we will fulfill in each other and all that. So, but yeah, starting a coalition is as simple as, kind of starting a list of people with email and communicating with them and getting them together.
And the overarching question you would ask them, or something similar, is how can we enhance and enrich our children's education, or, something like the educational attainment, education. How can we enrich and enhance our children's education, our children's education in our community? And then each of those parties will have a piece of the puzzle, right? And you got a big piece too. And they're all going to bring their pieces to you, and think of a jigsaw puzzle. Then you sit in that room and you figure out, how do we link these pieces together to start building this picture out of what it looks like and what it will be in our community as far as enhancement and enrichment of educational opportunities for our children. I mean, everybody's going to bring a piece and they're going to talk about their piece, right? And you'll talk about your piece and they'll say, okay, well, how does that fit? So we can make a bigger piece and a bigger piece and a bigger piece. And soon that whole puzzle will start building out. That's a coalition.
Thank you. Thank you. That's really helpful. Capacity inventory.
Yeah, this is just an example. Yeah, I have several of these. I can find some others, and I'm sure in our website there's like many of these as well.
I appreciate you taking the time, John and Evis. I thank you.
Well, you got to tell us how it turns out.
Okay.
So that Evis and I can use it as another example as we teach ABCD and say, well, Amber, in Oregon, This is how she went about bringing asset-based community development together and the people, and this is what they ended up doing, you know, or this is all the good things that they're talking about. And it'll always be evolving. More partners will join, other people will drop off. Now, I'll tell you this secret too. If you go with one partner, that means that person controls. That means they can drop off and the project fails. But if you have multiple partners, if one drops off, the project keeps going. It's the concept of the starfish, you know, it's called starfish and the starfish and the spider. So a starfish, a spider, you can basically, you know, with a spider, you can cut its web and it's done, you know, it has to repair it. A starfish, if you cut off a leg, the leg grows back and then the other leg grows a starfish. And so what I'm saying is that if you put multiple task partners out there, if one drops off, the other one, it won't affect the project just continues, right? And that's why I'm a pastor of 3 churches. So I'm a Lutheran pastor, a United Methodist minister, and an Episcopal priest. And why, John, would you be in 3 different denominations of 3 different congregations? Well, it's like this. If one of the congregations starts getting rowdy, I can say, okay, I got 2 others and I'll just spend all my time helping those 2. And so they all balance each other. They won't try to control it because they can't, because they're in a multiple aspect. So your partnership with that one organization, even if it had gone and the same director came in at one time, they said, we're no longer going to partner with you, the project would fall apart. But if you have 5 and one drops off and you got 4 others are going to continue moving.
Yes.
You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
So it's healthier.
I think we're really lucky that, in that sense, we're lucky it didn't work out, because even though I invited all these other people to the table, none of them were really ready yet to form a partnership. So, you know, it kept the process slow enough. It slowed down this momentum of that partnership so that the other people who've been following along now for 2 years, you know, maybe it's starting to do this, but that partnership might have left them hanging.
Yep.
So
left them out.
I appreciate that insight. I'll come back to that. I'm surprised too in myself, just, you know, my own process of getting stressed and, you know, asset-based community development's great when everyone has that mindset, but you know, when, you know, just the personal process of not going down the dark cloud rabbit hole when somebody seems to have different set of values. So that's my own personal work and where I got to put some care. So, yeah, thank you for all this insight. And that's a really helpful point, is, you know, really ensuring that it's a many-legged starfish partnership.
Yeah, and I added like another link that we have in our website. It's like a workbook to create capacity inventory as well, which is, you know, again, very helpful for the coalition building.
Thank you. Wonderful. This looks fantastic.
All right. Well, then I guess that John will see you next week. Maybe I won't see you. If you need again any to run anything, just, you know, feel free to email us.
Thank you very much. This is great.
Good luck. Good luck to you.
Thank you. Thank you.
See you next week. Take
Appreciate
care.
it. Have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.